They called her damaged goods and left her to die in the snow, but when a rancher's child wrapped small arms around her and whispered, "Mama," everything changed. This is the story of Elena Brooks, a mail-order bride rejected on a frozen platform who found family in the most unexpected place. A story of second chances, fierce protection, and love that defied every judgment. Stay with me until the very end, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elena's story travels. The wind screamed across the Wyoming platform like something alive and hungry, tearing through Elena Brooks' thin traveling coat as if the fabric were made of paper. Snow came down in sheets so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead, and the cold, God, the cold, had stopped hurting 20 minutes ago. That was the dangerous part. She'd read once, in some book whose title she couldn't remember, that when you stopped shivering, when the cold turned from agony to a strange drifting numbness, you were close to the end. Elena's fingers had gone white inside her threadbare gloves. Her lips felt thick and clumsy. The platform was empty now, the last of the afternoon train passengers having scattered into the dying light, swallowed by the storm. Even the station master had retreated inside, locking the door against the weather, and against her. She stood alone with her battered carpetbag at her feet, everything she owned compressed into that single piece of luggage, and tried to remember how to breathe without sobbing. He looked at me like I was garbage. Silas Dorman, the rancher who'd sent for her, the man who'd promised through carefully written letters over 6 months that he was looking for a wife, someone strong enough for frontier life, kind enough for his home, willing enough to build something real in this harsh country. His letters had been stiff but sincere. He'd sent money for her passage from St. Louis, enough for a third-class ticket and a new dress she couldn't afford to buy. She'd traveled for 8 days, trading the suffocating smoke and crowds of the city for this raw, beautiful emptiness. And when she'd stepped off that train an hour ago, carpetbag clutched in both hands, heart hammering with nervous hope, Silas Dorman had taken one look at her and gone completely still. His eyes had traveled from her worn boots to her thin frame. Too thin, she knew. Years of hunger didn't disappear in a few months of better eating, then settled on her face. Specifically, on her left eye. The one that still sat slightly crooked in its socket, the eyelid that drooped just a fraction, the scar that traced a faint line through her eyebrow. Healed, yes. Functional, but marked. Different, wrong. "You didn't mention this in your letters," he'd said flatly. Elena had forced herself to stand straighter. "You didn't ask about scars, Mr. Dorman. You asked if I was healthy and willing to work. I'm both?" "You're damaged." He'd said it the way someone might comment on a cracked plate or a lame horse. Simple statement of fact. No emotion at all. "I need a wife who can give me strong sons. Look at you. Half-starved, marked up like you've been through a war. What kind of children would you give me?" The shame had hit her like a physical blow. Around them, other passengers had slowed, pretending not to listen while drinking in every word. A woman in a fine wool coat had actually tusked under her breath, shaking her head as she passed. "I survived," Elena had whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "The injury was from an accident 3 years ago. It doesn't affect my health or—" "Doesn't matter." Silas had already been turning away. "I ordered a wife, not damaged goods. You can take the next train back. I'll not be held responsible for freight that arrives broken." And he'd walked away. Just like that. Climbed onto his wagon and driven off into the snow, leaving her standing on that platform with nowhere to go and no money for a return ticket, even if one existed. The station master, a weathered man with tobacco-stained whiskers, had emerged long enough to tell her the next eastbound train wouldn't come through for 5 days. Then he'd looked her up and down with an expression that made her skin crawl and suggested she'd best find alternative arrangements if she wanted to stay warm. When she'd asked about a hotel or boarding house, he'd laughed. "Lady, you got money for that? 'Cause you sure don't look like you do. And no decent place in town's gonna take in a woman alone with no references and no man to vouch for her. You understand what I'm saying?" She'd understood perfectly. Her choices were freeze on this platform, accept whatever alternative arrangements men like the station master had in mind, or there was no or. Those were the only options. So she'd stayed on the platform as the afternoon bled into evening, as the temperature dropped and the snow turned vicious, and she'd tried to make herself small and invisible, praying the storm would drive everyone else inside until she could figure something out. But the storm had driven 3 other men onto the platform instead. Elena heard them before she saw them. Loud voices cutting through the wind, the particular loose-limbed swagger that spoke of too much whiskey and too little sense. 3 of them, ranging in age from early 20s to perhaps 40, all dressed in rough work clothes and radiating that specific kind of danger that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. They spotted her immediately. "Well now," the youngest one called out, grinning with too many teeth. "What have we got here? Little bird fallen out of its nest?" Elena grabbed her carpet bag and tried to move toward the station door, but they spread out casually, cutting off that avenue without seeming to try. Her heart kicked into a faster rhythm. The numbness in her fingers suddenly didn't matter anymore, adrenaline burning hot through her veins. "Station's closed," she said, forcing her voice steady. "And I'm waiting for someone." "Sure you are." The oldest one, the one with a scar bisecting his left cheek and mean little eyes, moved closer. "We heard all about you, sweetheart. Silas Dorman's mail-order bride that wasn't quite up to standard. Damaged goods, he called you. Left you out here in the cold." "That's between me and Mr. Dorman," Elena said, backing up a step. Her shoulders hit the station wall, trapped. "I don't want any trouble." "No trouble at all." The one in the middle, medium height and built like a bull, smiled slow and ugly. "See, we're just thinking, Silas already paid for you to come all this way. Seems a shame to waste the investment. Maybe one of us could take you off his hands. What do you say? I got a cabin about 10 miles north. Nothing fancy, but it's warm, and I'm not so particular about a crooked eye." "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "Thank you, but no. I'll be fine on my own." Thing is," Scarface said, moving even closer, and now she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You don't look fine. You look about 2 hours from frozen solid, and there ain't nobody coming to help you, so maybe you should reconsider your options while you still got choices to make." His hand reached for her arm. Elena jerked back, her carpet bag swinging up instinctively as a barrier between them, and the rage that she'd been swallowing all day suddenly roared up her throat in a scream. "Don't you touch me!" They laughed. All 3 of them, like her terror, was the funniest thing they'd seen all week. Scarface grabbed for her again, and this time his fingers caught her wrist, squeezing hard enough to hurt. "Now, honey, no need for all that. Let her go." The voice came from behind them, quiet and absolutely cold, cutting through the wind and the snow, and the men's laughter like a blade through silk. All 4 of them spun around. A man stood at the edge of the platform, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy sheepskin coat and a hat pulled low against the weather. Snow clung to his shoulders. Ice glittered in his dark beard, and in his arms, bundled against his chest in layers of wool and fur, was a little girl, maybe 4 years old, solemn dark eyes peering out from beneath a knit cap. The 3 drunk men had gone very still. "Wyatt," the youngest one said, and there was something new in his voice now, something wary. "Didn't know you were in town." "Let her go," the man, Wyatt, repeated, not raising his voice, not moving toward them, just standing there with that child in his arms and ice in his eyes. "Now." Scarface's grip tightened for a second on Elena's wrist, some stupid masculine calculation playing out behind his mean little eyes, weighing whether he could push this, whether he wanted to. Then he let go and stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "No harm meant, Hale. Just offering the lady some Christian charity, seeing as how she's been abandoned and all." "Christian charity?" Wyatt's voice was flat with contempt. "That what you call cornering a woman in a snowstorm, Ben? 3 grown men against 1? That seemed charitable to you? Now, Wyatt, get out of here, all 3 of you, before I decide you need a more permanent lesson in hospitality." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. The wind howled. Snow swirled across the platform. Elena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel the place on her wrist where Scarface, Ben, had grabbed her, could taste copper fear on her tongue. Then Bullbuilt muttered something under his breath and turned away. The young one followed immediately. Ben held Wyatt's gaze for another few seconds, then spat in the snow and stalked off into the storm. Silence crashed down like a weight. Elena sagged against the station wall, her legs suddenly unreliable. her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that might have been laughter, or tears, or both. The numbness was gone now, replaced by pins and needles, and the horrible shaking that came after danger passed. "Thank you," she managed. Thank you. I couldn't." "How long have you been out here?" Wyatt asked, and his voice had gentled slightly, though it still carried that core of stone underneath. "Since the afternoon train." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the shaking. 3, 4 hours, maybe? I'm not sure anymore." The little girl in his arms made a soft, distressed sound and buried her face against Wyatt's shoulder. He looked at Elena for a long moment, really looked, his eyes traveling over her thin coat, her soaked-through boots, the way she couldn't stop shivering. When he spoke again, there was something like anger in his voice, though she didn't think it was directed at her. "You're hypothermic. Another hour and you'd be past saving." He shifted the child in his arms. "Can you walk?" Yes, I think so." "Then pick up your bag and come with me. My wagon's just down the street." Elena's fingers fumbled for the carpetbag handle. Her mind was working sluggishly, suspicion and desperation warring with each other. "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere warm, with food and a fire and a door that locks." He turned toward the steps leading off the platform. "You can decide what comes next when you're not dying of cold. Now move before that storm gets worse." It wasn't a request, but there was nothing predatory in his voice, nothing like the ugly hunger in those other men's eyes. And the child in his arms, she was watching Elena with those solemn dark eyes, one small hand reaching out as if to say, "Come on, come with us." Elena picked up her bag and followed. Tit-tit. The wagon was exactly where he'd said it would be, a sturdy flatbed with a canvas cover tied down against the weather. 2 draft horses stood patient in their traces, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Wyatt lifted the little girl into the wagon bed, settling her on a pile of blankets, then turned to help Elena up. His hand was warm even through her glove, actually warm, real heat from a living body, and she almost sobbed at the sensation. "Under the canvas," he said. "There's more blankets back there. Wrap up. We've got a 2-hour drive ahead of us." 2 hours? Elena's sluggish brain tried to process that. "Your home is 2 hours away?" "Yes." "But you came into town in this storm for supplies." He gestured to several canvas-wrapped bundles secured in the wagon bed. "And apparently it's a good thing I did. Now get under those blankets before you lose more fingers." The little girl had already burrowed into the pile of wool and fur, creating a warm nest. She patted the space beside her, looking at Elena with that same solemn, measuring expression. Elena climbed in, her movements clumsy and uncoordinated, and the little girl immediately scooted closer, pressing her small, warm body against Elena's side. Small hands helped pull blankets over them both. "Her name's Juniper," Wyatt said from the front of the wagon. "She doesn't talk much to strangers, so don't take it personal. Junie, this is—" He paused. "I don't actually know your name." "Elena Brooks." The words felt strange in her mouth, thick and awkward. "From St. Louis." "Wyatt Hale. Welcome to Wyoming, Miss Brooks. Try to stay conscious during the drive." Then he clicked to the horses and the wagon lurched forward into the storm. Elena had meant to stay alert, to watch where they were going, to maintain some sense of awareness and self-preservation. But the blankets were so warm, and Juniper was like a tiny furnace pressed against her side, and the hypothermia had drained her more than she'd realized. She drifted in and out, catching fragments, the creak of wagon wheels, the whisper of wind through canvas, the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. Once, she surfaced enough to realize that Juniper had fallen asleep with her head on Elena's shoulder, one small fist tangled in Elena's coat. Another time, she heard Wyatt's voice, low and rough, singing something under his breath, a ballad, maybe. Words lost to the storm, but the melody clear and oddly comforting. When she finally woke completely, the wagon had stopped and someone was lifting her down. "Easy," Wyatt's voice said near her ear. "I've got you. Just a few more steps." Her feet touched ground, wooden boards, a porch maybe, and then there was warmth, real warmth, Not just the trapped heat of blankets, but actual fire warmth, wood smoke, and glowing heat that made her skin prickle painfully as circulation returned. She was in a cabin, one large main room with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, a cast iron stove in the corner, rough wooden furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. Warm, safe, real. "Sit," Wyatt said, guiding her to a chair near the stove. "Don't move." Elena sat. Her legs wouldn't have held her anyway. She watched in a daze as he moved around the room with efficient, economical motions, building up the fire, filling a kettle with water and setting it on the stove, pulling a blanket from a chest and draping it over her shoulders. Juniper had woken and was watching from a corner, chewing on her thumb, those dark eyes tracking everything. Wyatt knelt in front of Elena and began unlacing her boots. "I can," she started. "You can't," he said flatly. "Your fingers are still too cold. You'll fumble with the laces and make it worse. Let me work." He pulled off her boots. They were soaked through, ice crystals glittering in the seams, then her stockings. Her feet were a mottled white and red, the toes darkening toward purple. Wyatt made a low sound in his throat that might have been a curse, then wrapped them in a dry towel and propped them near the stove. "You came that close," he said quietly. "Another hour and you'd have lost toes. Maybe more." "I didn't know what else to do." Elena's voice cracked. "He just left me there. Like I was nothing, like I was damaged goods." "I heard." Wyatt stood, moving to the stove where the kettle was beginning to steam. "Silas Dorman's a fool and a coward, and if you see him again, you tell him I said so." "You know him?" "Everyone knows everyone out here, Miss Brooks. It's a small territory." He poured hot water into a mug, added something from a tin on the shelf, stirred it. "Doesn't mean I like them all. Here, drink this. It's chamomile and honey. Your body needs warmth from the inside." Elena took the mug in both shaking hands and sipped. The liquid was sweet and hot and perfect, coating her throat, settling in her stomach like an anchor. She drank half of it before she could trust herself to speak again. "Why did you help me?" Wyatt had moved to the stove, pulling out a pot of something that smelled like heaven. Stew, rich with meat and vegetables. "You needed help. Those men were going to hurt you, not complicated. Most people wouldn't have stopped. I'm not most people." He ladled stew into 2 bowls, cut thick slices of bread from a loaf on the counter. "And I know what it's like to be left out in the cold, literally and otherwise." Juniper had crept closer, drawn by the smell of food. Wyatt handed her a bowl, and she took it solemnly, settling on the floor near the fire, spooning stew into her mouth with steady concentration. He brought the other bowl to Elena. "Eat. Slowly, your stomach's going to be fragile after hypothermia, but you need food." Elena ate. The stew was simple, but perfect. Beef and carrots and potatoes in a rich broth, the bread still warm, butter melting into the grain. She ate slowly, like he'd instructed, and felt life coming back into her body inch by inch. Warmth, safety, food. The 3 things she'd been missing for so long, she'd almost forgotten what they felt like. Wyatt ate standing up, leaning against the counter, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not hostile, but not exactly friendly either. Assessing, maybe. Trying to figure out what kind of problem he'd brought into his house. When Elena had finished eating, when the shaking had mostly stopped and color had returned to her fingers, he finally spoke again. "I'll give you straight truth, Miss Brooks. I'm not in the market for a wife. I have no interest in marriage, and I sure as hell am not looking to take advantage of a woman in a bad situation. You understand me?" "Yes." Elena nodded, too tired to feel offended. "I understand." "Good. Now here's what I'm offering. You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, when the storm breaks, I'll take you back to town and put you on that eastbound train with money for a ticket. Or if you prefer, I'll drive you to the next town over. It's bigger, has more opportunities. Either way, you'll be safe until then. That acceptable to you?" It was more than acceptable. It was a miracle. But something in Elena made her ask, "And if I don't want to go back east? If I don't want to go to the next town?" Wyatt's expression didn't change. "Then you tell me what you do want, and we'll figure something out. But not tonight." Tonight you're exhausted and half frozen and in no shape to make big decisions. So we're going to keep this simple. Warm fire, safe bed, locked door. Tomorrow we'll talk about everything else. Okay? Elena pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Thank you. For everything. I can't. Don't thank me yet, Wyatt said, almost gently. Thank me tomorrow when you're warm and fed and thinking clearly. For now, just rest. He showed her to a small room off the main space, barely more than a closet, really, with a narrow bed and a single window covered with thick curtains. But there were clean sheets on the bed, warm quilts piled high, and a bar across the inside of the door that would lock securely. Nobody's going to bother you, Wyatt said from the doorway. I sleep in the room across the hall, and Juniper's next to me. You need anything, you call out. Otherwise, I'll see you in the morning. Mr. Hale. Wyatt. Wyatt. Elena looked at him, this strange, gruff man who'd saved her life for no reason except that she'd needed saving. Why did you really bring me here? You could have taken me to someone else in town, a church maybe, or churches in Hollow Creek close at sunset, and there's no parson lives close enough to matter. And I told you, I know what it's like to be left in the cold. His expression shifted, something old and painful moving behind his eyes. Let's leave it at that for tonight. He pulled the door closed behind him. Elena stood in that small room, listening to his footsteps retreat, listening to the murmur of his voice as he settled Juniper in bed, listening to the crackle of the fire in the main room. Outside, the storm continued its assault. But in here, in this rough cabin in the middle of nowhere, she was warm. She was safe. She slid the bar across the door, more from habit than any real fear, and collapsed onto the bed still fully dressed. For the first time in years, Elena Brooks fell asleep without crying. She woke to thin morning light filtering through the curtains and the smell of coffee. For a long, disoriented moment, Elena couldn't remember where she was. Then memory crashed back. The platform, the storm, the three men, Wyatt Hale appearing like something out of a fever dream to pull her back from the edge. She sat up slowly. Her body ached in a dozen places, bruises she hadn't noticed yesterday making themselves known now. But she was warm. She was alive. The bar was still across the door. Nothing had been disturbed. Elena took a moment to finger comb her hair into some semblance of order, to smooth the worst wrinkles from her dress, to prepare herself to face the day. Then she slid back the bar and opened the door. Wyatt stood at the stove, cooking something that sizzled and popped. Juniper sat at the rough wooden table, swinging her legs and drawing something on a scrap of paper with a nub of pencil. Neither of them looked up when Elena emerged. "Coffee's hot," Wyatt said without turning around. "Eggs will be ready in a minute. How'd you sleep?" "Like the dead." Elena moved to the table, hesitant. "Thank you for everything. The bed, the fire, the meal last night. You already thanked me. Don't make a habit of it." But there was no real bite in his voice. "Sit down. Food's no good cold." Elena sat. Juniper glanced up at her, offered a small, shy smile, then went back to her drawing. It looked like horses, Elena realized. Rows and rows of horses, all running in the same direction. Wyatt brought over 3 plates, eggs and thick-cut bacon, more of that good bread toasted and dripping with butter. He sat down across from her and dug in without ceremony. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Wyatt pushed his plate back and folded his hands on the table. "So," he said, "let's talk about your situation." Elena swallowed hard. "You said you'd take me to the station today, put me on a train. I said I'd give you that option. I'm not going to force you onto a train if that's not what you want. What I want doesn't seem to matter much." The bitterness leaked through before she could stop it. "I wanted a home, a family, a chance to build something decent. Instead, I got rejected on a train platform and left to freeze." "Silas is an idiot." "Silas is practical," Elena corrected. "He ordered a wife who could give him strong children. I don't blame him for sending back defective merchandise." "Don't." Wyatt's voice went hard. "Don't talk about yourself like that. There's nothing defective about you except maybe your taste in men." Elena laughed, sharp and humorless. "My taste in men is limited to whoever was willing to answer a mail-order bride advertisement. Not exactly a large selection pool." So what do you want to do? Wyatt asked. Real answer, not what you think you should say. Elena looked down at her plate. I don't want to go back east. There's nothing for me there. My parents are dead, I have no siblings, and the job I had, working in a textile mill, barely paid enough to keep me fed. That's why I answered the advertisement in the first place. I thought maybe out here, in a new place, I could have a different life. And you still can, Wyatt said. Just not with Silas Dorman, which honestly is a blessing in disguise. Man's a miserable drunk and mean to his animals. You dodged a bullet there. Then what? Elena spread her hands. I have no money, no skills except sewing and cooking, and apparently I'm too damaged for anyone to want me. Where exactly am I supposed to go? Juniper made a small sound, almost a whimper. Both adults looked at her. She had stopped drawing and was staring at Elena with wide, distressed eyes. Hey, Wyatt said gently, reaching over to touch Juniper's hand. Hey, sweetheart, it's okay. Nobody's hurt. We're just talking. But Juniper kept staring at Elena, and there were tears gathering in those dark eyes now, and suddenly she pushed back from the table and scrambled across to Elena's side, climbing into her lap without asking, small arms wrapping tight around Elena's neck. Elena froze, shocked, but Juniper just pressed her face into Elena's shoulder and held on like she was afraid Elena might disappear. Well, Wyatt said quietly, that's new. She doesn't... Elena carefully put her arms around the little girl. I thought you said she doesn't talk to strangers. She doesn't, and she sure as hell doesn't climb into their laps. Wyatt was watching them with an expression Elena couldn't read. Juniper came to live with me 6 months ago after her mother, my sister, died in childbirth. Baby died too. Since then, Junie's barely spoken a word to anyone except me. Won't even look most people in the eye. But you... He trailed off, shaking his head. She's claimed you. Claimed me? Like a cat with a favorite person. Once they decide you're theirs, that's it. You're stuck. Elena looked down at Juniper, at the small, warm weight in her arms, the serious little face pressed against her shoulder. Something in her chest cracked open, something that had been frozen solid for years, protected behind walls of ice and desperation and the certainty that she would never be wanted by anyone. I don't mind being stuck, she whispered. Wyatt was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. I'm going to make you an offer, Miss Brooks, and I want you to think about it real careful before you answer, because it's going to sound strange and possibly insulting, but I swear to you it's made in good faith. Elena waited. You need a place to stay. I need help with Juniper. She needs a woman's influence, someone who can teach her things I can't. This cabin needs someone to manage the household while I'm working the ranch. So here's what I'm proposing. You stay here. Live in that room you slept in last night. Help with cooking, cleaning, looking after Juniper. In exchange, you get room, board, and a safe place to live until you figure out what comes next. No expectations beyond that. No obligations you don't agree to. Just honest work for honest pay. You want to hire me? Elena asked slowly. As a... what? A housekeeper? As someone who needs a home and happens to be good at the things that make a house run smooth, Wyatt said. I can't pay you much in actual money. Ranching's a slim margin business, but you'd have your own space, your own key to your own door, and nobody in this house would bother you. That I swear. It was the strangest job offer Elena had ever received. It was also the best one. What would people say? She asked. An unmarried woman living in a bachelor's house? People will say what they always say, that I'm strange and antisocial and possibly dangerous. Wyatt shrugged. Wyatt, let them talk. I don't go to town often enough to care about gossip. And when I want to leave, then you leave. I'm not going to lock you in the cellar, Miss Brooks. You want to go, you go. But until then, you've got a place here if you want it. Juniper had relaxed in Elena's arms, her breathing evening out. Elena looked down at the little girl, then up at Wyatt, then around this rough cabin that smelled like wood smoke and coffee and safety. Can I think about it for a day? She asked. Take all the time you need, Wyatt said. Storm's still too bad for safe travel anyway. But Elena? He used her first name for the first time, and it sounded strange and right in his rough voice. I meant what I said last night. There's nothing damaged about you. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time. Elena felt her throat close up with unexpected tears. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've lived through a Wyoming winter and then decide if I did you a favor. But he was smiling when he said it, just barely, just a hint of warmth in those hard eyes. And for the first time since stepping off that train, Elena thought maybe she had found something worth staying for. Elena stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go, though that was certainly true, but because when she woke on the third morning in that small, clean room with sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee drifting under the door, she realized she hadn't woken afraid. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she'd opened her eyes without that immediate clench of dread in her stomach, that automatic calculation of what threats the day might hold. She found Wyatt in the barn, mucking out stalls while Juniper sat on an overturned bucket nearby, watching him work with that same solemn intensity she brought to everything. Neither of them heard Elena approach until she cleared her throat. Wyatt straightened, pitchfork in hand, hay dust coating his shoulders. Morning. I'd like to accept your offer, Elena said without preamble. If it still stands. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite relief, but close. It stands. You sure? I'm sure. Elena folded her arms against the morning chill. I'm good at cooking and cleaning, I can sew and mend, and I promise I'll earn my keep. I won't be dead weight. Never thought you would be. Wyatt stabbed the pitchfork into the ground. Juniper's already attached to you anyway. Might as well make it official. As if summoned by her name, Juniper hopped off her bucket and ran to Elena, wrapping both arms around Elena's legs in a fierce hug. Elena's hand came down automatically to rest on the child's head, and the rightness of that simple gesture nearly broke her. Then it's settled, Wyatt said. You'll take meals with us, use the washroom as needed, and your room's your own space. I won't come in without knocking. There's a lock on the inside if you want additional peace of mind. Fair? More than fair. Elena hesitated. Should we write something down? Make it official? You want a contract? I just want to make sure we're clear on expectations, so there's no confusion later. Wyatt studied her for a long moment, and Elena had the uncomfortable sensation that he was seeing past all her careful words to the fear underneath. Fear that this arrangement would shift without warning, that promises made in daylight would be broken after dark, that she'd wake up one morning to find the terms had changed and she'd be trapped again. All right, he said quietly. After breakfast, we'll sit down and write out exactly what we're both agreeing to. Terms, conditions, everything spelled out clear. That work for you? Yes. Thank you. They did exactly that. After a breakfast of oatmeal and dried apples, Wyatt pulled out paper and pencil, and they negotiated the terms of Elena's employment like two business partners hammering out a contract. Room and board in exchange for household management, cooking, laundry, and helping care for Juniper. Elena would have 1 full day off per week, Sundays she chose, and could leave the arrangement at any time with 2 weeks' notice. Wyatt would provide transportation to town once monthly for any supplies or personal business Elena needed to conduct. Neither party would enter the other's private quarters without permission. At the bottom, they both signed their names. Wyatt Brooks Hale in a bold, confident scrawl. Elena Catherine Brooks in careful, precise script. There, Wyatt said, pushing the paper across to her. Legal as we can make it without involving lawyers. You keep that somewhere safe. Elena folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. The weight of it felt like armor. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was strange and comfortable in equal measure. Elena woke with the sun, started the stove, ground coffee beans, and set water to boil. Wyatt came in from morning chores smelling of horses and cold air, Juniper trailing behind him like a shadow. They ate breakfast together, simple food, but plentiful, and Elena took quiet pride in the way Wyatt's tense shoulders would relax slightly after the first cup of coffee, the way Juniper would hum contentedly over her oatmeal. After breakfast, Wyatt disappeared into the demands of the ranch, fences to mend, animals to tend, wood to chop, 1,000 tasks that seemed to multiply faster than he could complete them. Elena threw herself into transforming the cabin from a bachelor's rough shelter into something that felt like a home. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles were raw. She washed windows until they gleamed. She took inventory of the pantry and root cellar, making lists of what they had and what they'd need before winter truly set in. She discovered Wyatt's pathetic attempts at mending, shirts with buttons hanging by threads, socks darned so badly they were more whole than fabric, and spent an entire afternoon repairing everything while Juniper sat beside her, learning to thread a needle with clumsy, determined fingers. "You're nesting," Wyatt observed one evening, watching Elena rearrange the dish shelves for the third time in as many days. "I'm organizing," Elena corrected. "There's a difference." "If you say so." But he was smiling slightly, that rare expression that softened his whole face. "Place hasn't been this clean since ever, probably." "That's because you're terrible at housekeeping." "Never claimed otherwise." He stretched, joints popping. "But I appreciate what you're doing. Feels different in here. Better." Elena looked around the cabin, at the swept floors and the neatly arranged shelves, at the curtains she'd washed and rehung, at the small vase of dried flowers she'd found in a box and placed on the table as a centerpiece. It did feel different. It felt lived in, cared for. It felt like a home. Juniper was the revelation Elena hadn't expected. The little girl barely spoke. A handful of words here and there, yes and no and please and thank you in a whisper-soft voice, but she communicated in a dozen other ways. Through the drawings she made obsessively, horses and trees and stick figure people holding hands. Through the way she'd slip her hand into Elena's when they walked outside. Through the fierce, protective way she'd position herself between Elena and any perceived threat, small body rigid with determination. "She thinks you're hers to protect," Wyatt explained one afternoon, watching Juniper stand guard while Elena hung laundry on the line. "Ever since her mama died, she's been terrified of losing people. She wouldn't let me out of her sight for the first 2 months. Now she's decided you're someone worth protecting too." "I don't need a 4-year-old bodyguard," Elena said, amused and touched in equal measure. "Try telling her that." Wyatt's expression went distant. "My sister, Margaret, she was tough as nails and twice as sharp, survived things that would have broken most people. Then she meets a traveling merchant, falls hard, gets pregnant. He promises to come back for her. Never does. Margaret handles it, though, decides she'll raise the baby on her own, does everything right, and then he trailed off." Elena waited. "Childbirth went wrong," Wyatt finished quietly. "Baby was breech, labor went on too long. By the time they got her to the doctor in town, it was too late. Lost them both, Margaret and the baby boy she'd been so excited to meet." He cleared his throat roughly. Juniper was there, 4 years old, and she saw her mama dying, heard her crying, couldn't understand why nobody could fix it. She hasn't been the same since. "Oh, Wyatt," Elena pressed a hand to her chest. I'm so sorry." "Not your fault, just explaining why she is the way she is, why she doesn't trust easy, but once she does, she holds on like a burr." He looked at Elena directly. "She's holding on to you pretty tight already. Just wanted you to know what that means. What it costs her if you leave." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. "I'm not planning to leave," Elena said carefully. "Not anytime soon, anyway. Plans change. People leave. It's the way of things." Wyatt shrugged, but there was something brittle in the gesture. "Just, if you do decide to go, give us warning. Let her adjust to the idea. Don't disappear in the night." "I won't." Elena met his eyes. "I promise." 3 weeks passed, then 4. The autumn cold deepened, frost painting the windows each morning, the days growing shorter and sharper. Elena's life condensed into the warm circle of the cabin, the rhythm of chores and meals and quiet evenings by the fire. It was monotonous. It was peaceful. It was nothing like the desperate, grinding survival she'd known in St. Louis. She was almost content. Then Wyatt came back from town with news that shattered their careful peace. It was a Saturday, late afternoon. Elena had spent the day making preserves, the last of the late harvest apples boiled down into thick, sweet jam that would keep them through winter. Juniper sat at the table, carefully labeling jars in her wobbling child's print. The cabin smelled like cinnamon and cloves and comfort. Wyatt came through the door like a thunderstorm, all sharp movements and barely contained anger. He dropped the supply sacks on the floor with more force than necessary and stood there, jaw clenched, hands flexing at his sides. "What happened?" Elena asked immediately. "Town happened. People happened." He yanked off his hat and threw it at the hook on the wall. It missed, fell to the floor. He didn't pick it up. "You know what the good citizens of Hollow Creek are saying about us?" Elena's stomach dropped. "I can imagine." "Can you?" Wyatt's voice was hard. "Because I just spent an hour listening to speculation about exactly what kind of arrangement we have here. Whether you're my mistress or my whore. Whether I'm taking advantage of you or you're scheming to trap me. Silas Dorman's been spreading it around that you're compromised goods, and I'm harboring a fallen woman under my roof. The preacher's wife actually crossed the street to avoid speaking to me." "Oh, God." Elena sank into a chair. She'd known this was coming. Of course she'd known. But she'd let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were far enough from town that nobody would care. "I'm sorry. I should have realized." "Don't!" Wyatt pointed a finger at her. "Don't you dare apologize for other people's small minds and dirty thoughts. You've done nothing wrong. We've done nothing wrong. But that doesn't matter to them, does it? They've decided we're scandalous, and now they're going to make it everyone's business." Juniper had gone very still at the table, her eyes wide and frightened. Elena automatically moved to her, gathering the child close. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. "Hell if I know." Wyatt paced the length of the cabin. "I don't give a damn what they say about me. Never have, never will. But you—" He stopped, running both hands through his hair. "You're trying to build a life here. A reputation. This kind of talk could ruin that." "I don't care about reputation." Elena surprised herself with the fierceness in her own voice. "I care about having a roof over my head, and food in my stomach, and people who don't treat me like garbage. Everything else is just noise. It's not just noise when it affects whether shopkeepers will sell to you, whether other women will speak to you, whether—" He cut himself off, something shifting in his expression. "The town council's talking about paying me a visit." "What?" Elena's blood went cold. "Why?" "To discuss the moral situation at my ranch. To ensure I'm not, and I quote, corrupting an innocent woman or harboring immoral behavior." His lip curled. "Bunch of self-righteous hypocrites, most of them with secrets that would curl your hair, but they've decided we're their newest scandal and they're going to meddle." "When are they coming?" "Monday. Maybe Tuesday. Whenever they work up the nerve to ride out here in the cold." Wyatt resumed pacing. "I should have thought of this. Should have realized how it would look. I saw someone who needed help, and I helped. Didn't occur to me that would be considered suspect behavior." Elena thought fast, her mind racing through options and consequences. "What if I leave? Just for a while, until the gossip dies down. I could go to the next town, find work." "No." Wyatt stopped pacing. "Absolutely not. I'm not sending you away because some busybodies can't mind their own business. But if the town council can go to hell." He crossed his arms. "This is my land, my house. I'll harbor whoever I damn well please, and if they don't like it, they can—" "Wyatt!" Elena's voice was soft but firm. "I appreciate the sentiment, but I also appreciate the reality, which is that you live in this community. You need these people, even if you don't like them. If they turn against you, then they turn against me. Wouldn't be the first time." There was a story there, Elena realized, something in his past that had already put distance between Wyatt and the good people of Hollow Creek. But before she could ask, Juniper made a small, distressed sound and buried her face in Elena's shoulder. Both adults immediately shifted focus to the frightened child. "Hey, sweetheart," Elena murmured, stroking Juniper's hair. "It's okay. Nobody's going anywhere. We're all staying right here." "Promise?" Juniper's voice was barely audible. "I promise." Elena looked at Wyatt over the child's head. "We'll figure this out. Together." Wyatt's expression softened fractionally. "Together," he agreed. But I'm telling you right now, I'm not throwing you to the wolves to satisfy town gossip. And I'm telling you that I won't let your life be ruined because you were kind to a stranger. Elena settled Juniper more comfortably in her lap. There has to be a middle ground, a solution that protects both of us. They spent the evening in tense discussion, voices low so Juniper wouldn't overhear, trying to find that middle ground. Elena could move into the barn, but that was ridiculous. It was too cold and too dangerous. Wyatt could hire additional help, a man to act as chaperone. But that assumed they could find someone willing and that they had money to pay another salary. They could simply ignore the gossip and hope it died down naturally. But the town council's threatened visit suggested this wasn't just gossip anymore. It was becoming an official concern. Around and around they went, circling the problem without finding a solution. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, they went to bed with nothing resolved. Elena lay in her small room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside and wondering if this fragile piece she'd found was about to shatter. She'd been happy here. She'd been safe. The thought of losing that, of being forced back into desperate uncertainty, made her want to scream. But she wouldn't let Wyatt suffer for helping her. She couldn't. Sunday dawned gray and bitter, the sky pressing low and threatening snow. Elena went through the motions of her day off, sleeping late, reading from Wyatt's small collection of books, helping Juniper with a sewing project, but her mind was elsewhere, turning over the problem like a puzzle with missing pieces. They were eating a quiet supper when Juniper, who'd been unusually silent even for her, suddenly spoke up. "Why can't Elena be my mama?" Both adults froze. "Junie," Wyatt said carefully, "it's not that simple." "Why not?" Juniper looked between them with those serious dark eyes. "She takes care of me like a mama. She lives here like a mama. She loves me like a mama. So why can't she just be my mama?" Elena's throat closed up completely. Wyatt looked like he'd been punched. "Because being someone's mama is more complicated than just living in the same house," Wyatt said finally. "There are rules and stupid rules," Juniper said with sudden fierce conviction. "Stupid rules that make Elena go away." "Nobody's going anywhere, sweetheart," Elena managed. "I promise." But Juniper shook her head, tears welling up. "You said that, but everyone says that. Mama said she'd be fine and then she went away and never came back. Papa said he'd come get us and he never did. Everyone leaves. Everyone lies." She scrambled down from her chair and ran to her room, slamming the door behind her. Elena and Wyatt sat in stunned silence. "Out of the mouths of babes," Wyatt said quietly. "She's 4 years old. She doesn't understand. She understands better than we do." Wyatt pushed his plate away. "She's asking the question everyone else is dancing around. If you're doing all the work of being a wife and mother, why aren't you actually a wife and mother?" Elena's heart stuttered. "Wyatt, I'm not proposing." He held up a hand quickly. "Don't panic. I'm just saying she's got a point. In the eyes of the town, the only acceptable way for us to live like this is if we're married. Any other arrangement is scandalous. Marriage is a legal bond. It's not something to enter into lightly, just to satisfy busybodies." "I know that." Wyatt stood, began clearing dishes. "I'm just thinking out loud, trying to see all the angles." Elena helped him wash up, both of them moving in careful silence. Her mind was spinning. Marriage, to Wyatt. It was absurd. They barely knew each other. She'd only been here a month. He'd made it clear he had no interest in a wife. She had no desire to trap anyone into obligation. And yet Juniper's question echoed in her head. Why can't Elena be my mama? Because she was, in all but name. She cared for the child, worried about her, felt that fierce protective love that had surprised her with its intensity. And Wyatt, he was a good man, honorable, kind in his gruff way. Not someone who would hurt her. But marriage was trust on a scale Elena wasn't sure she could manage, giving someone that much power over her life. What if he changed? What if the kindness was temporary? What if... "Stop spiraling," Wyatt said, not looking at her. "I can hear you thinking yourself into a panic from here." "I'm not panicking." "You're breathing like you're about to run." He dried the last plate and set it aside. "Look, forget I said anything. We'll find another solution. There's always another solution." But the idea had taken root, thorny and persistent. That night, Elena lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and thinking about what marriage would mean. Legal protection? Yes. Social acceptability, a permanent place for her, and security for Juniper, but also risk. Terrible risk. She'd be legally bound to Wyatt, dependent on his goodwill, vulnerable in ways she'd sworn never to be vulnerable again. She must have finally slept, because she woke to urgent voices and Juniper crying. Elena threw on her robe and stumbled out to find Wyatt at the door, blocking 3 men from entering. Dawn light filtered weakly through the windows. It was barely past 6 in the morning. "I told you," Wyatt was saying, voice hard as stone. "You're not welcome here. Get off my property." "We have official business, Hale." The speaker was a portly man in an expensive coat, his face florid with cold and self-importance. "The town council has received complaints about your living situation. We're here to assess. You're here to stick your nose where it doesn't belong." Wyatt didn't budge from the doorway. "And you're doing it at dawn on a Monday morning, which tells me this is more about harassment than any legitimate concern." "We have every right." "You have no rights on my land." Wyatt's hand moved to rest on the rifle propped beside the door. Not a threat exactly, but not a threat either. "Now turn around and ride back to town before I decide you're trespassing." Elena's stomach churned. This was going to get ugly. She could see it in the set of the councilman's jaws, the way they were looking past Wyatt to where she stood in her robe with Juniper clinging to her legs, calculating, judging, already convinced of wrongdoing. "Mr. Hale," she called out, and her voice was steadier than she felt. "Perhaps we should speak with these gentlemen, clear up any misunderstandings." "There's nothing to clear up." Wyatt didn't turn around. "These men came here looking for scandal. I'm not going to perform for their entertainment." "We came here," the portly man said, "because an unmarried woman living with a bachelor raises questions of morality and propriety. Questions the community has a right." "The community has no rights over what happens in my private home," Wyatt interrupted. "Elena Brooks is my employee. She has her own room, her own arrangements, and her presence here is no more scandalous than hiring a ranch hand, which I noticed nobody had a problem with when I employed that drifter last spring." "A woman is different," one of the other councilmen spoke up. "Propriety demands—" "Propriety is just another word for control," Wyatt said flatly, "and I'm not interested." The tension was escalating. Elena could feel it building toward violence. Nothing Wyatt did, but the councilmen's faces were getting redder, their postures more aggressive. In another minute, someone would say something unforgivable, and this would explode into something far worse than gossip. She made a decision. "Gentlemen," Elena said, stepping forward with Juniper still attached to her legs, "I appreciate your concern for my welfare. Truly. It's kind of you to worry about a stranger's situation." Wyatt shot her a sharp look. She ignored it. "However," she continued, "I want to assure you that my arrangement with Mr. Hale is entirely proper. I have my own locked quarters. I am well compensated for my work, and at no time has Mr. Hale been anything less than a complete gentleman. Your concern, while noted, is unnecessary." "That may be your perspective, Miss Brooks," the portly man said, "but the appearance of impropriety is often as damaging as actual impropriety. Surely you can see how this situation looks to others." "What I see," Elena said quietly, "is that I was dying on a train platform and Mr. Hale saved my life. What I see is that a frightened little girl needed stability and care. What I see is honest work and honest living. If others choose to see something different, that says more about them than about us." One of the councilmen, younger than the others, with a less certain expression, shifted uncomfortably. "She has a point, Marcus. If nothing unseemly is actually happening, the appearance matters," Marcus, the portly one, insisted. "And the appearance here is, then marry me." Everyone froze. Elena's heart stopped. She turned slowly to look at Wyatt, certain she'd misheard. He wasn't looking at the councilman anymore. He was looking directly at her, his expression unreadable, but his voice absolutely steady. "Marry me," he repeated. "Right now, today. These men can serve as witnesses. That solve your appearance problem?" Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world had tilted sideways and she was falling. "Wyatt," she whispered, we haven't." I know. He finally looked at the councilman, and there was something dangerous in his eyes now. But apparently the only way to satisfy small minds is to give them what they claim to want. So, fine. We'll get married. That make everyone here happy? Marcus sputtered. Mr. Hale, I don't think a hasty marriage solves anything. If you're simply trying to cover up, I'm trying to get you off my property and out of our lives. Wyatt's voice could have cut glass. Elena needs legal protection from busybodies like you. Juniper needs stability. And I'm tired of explaining myself to people who wouldn't believe the truth if I carved it into their foreheads. So yes, we're getting married, unless you'd prefer to manufacture a different scandal to entertain yourself with. The councilmen exchanged glances. The younger one looked almost relieved. Marcus looked like he'd bitten into something sour. A marriage would resolve the immediate concern, he admitted reluctantly. But I hardly think... Then it's settled. Wyatt finally stepped back from the doorway, but his posture remained aggressive. You can witness the ceremony, or you can leave. Either way, you're done questioning my household. I haven't agreed to this, Elena said, finding her voice. Her hands were shaking. Juniper was staring up at her with huge, hopeful eyes. Wyatt turned to her. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. You don't have to. If you'd rather find another solution, there is no other solution. Elena heard the words coming out of her mouth and couldn't quite believe them. They've made that clear. Either we marry or they'll keep hounding us, keep threatening, keep trying to separate us. So that's a yes? Was it? Elena looked at Wyatt, really looked at him, at this man who'd saved her life, who'd given her shelter, who'd never once made her feel unsafe or pressured or less than human, who was offering marriage not as a trap but as protection, who was standing there waiting for her answer with something like fear in his eyes, as if he thought she might say no. She thought about Juniper, who needed stability more than anything else in the world. She thought about the cabin, about the life she'd been building here, about the first real peace she'd known in years. She thought about going back to that train platform, to hunger and cold and desperate uncertainty. And she thought about trust, about taking the terrifying leap of believing that maybe, just maybe, this man would keep his word. On my terms, she heard herself say. What terms? My own room, my own space. This marriage is legal protection, not anything else. Not unless we both decide differently. Agreed. And if I want to leave, if this doesn't work, you let me go. No legal tricks, no claiming ownership. You let me go. Something flashed across Wyatt's face, hurt, maybe, or understanding. Agreed. And you never, ever hurt Juniper. Or me. Not physically, not Elena. His voice was soft now. I would never. Not ever. I swear it on my life. She believed him. God help her, she believed him. Then yes, she whispered. Let's get married. The realization that she was falling in love with her husband should have been romantic. In the stories Elena had read as a girl, love arrived like sunrise, gradual, inevitable, beautiful. But this felt more like stumbling in the dark and suddenly finding solid ground where she'd expected empty air. Disorienting, terrifying, real. She didn't tell Wyatt. How could she? Their marriage was a business arrangement, a legal protection, a solution to a social problem. He'd made it clear from the beginning that he wasn't looking for a wife in any real sense. She had no right to complicate things with feelings he didn't want and couldn't return. So Elena kept her revelation locked tight in her chest and focused on the daily rhythms of survival. December arrived with brutal cold and snow that piled up past the windows. Wyatt worked from dawn until dark, keeping the animals alive, breaking ice, hauling feed, his hands cracked and bleeding by evening despite the salve Elena made him apply. She cooked, mended, managed their stores with increasing anxiety as supplies dwindled faster than expected. Juniper grew quieter as the cabin fever set in, her drawings becoming repetitive. Always the same three figures, always holding hands, always standing in front of a house with smoke curling from the chimney. They were a family in every way that mattered, except the one that Elena was beginning to want most desperately. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, 3 months after their wedding. Elena was in the root cellar taking inventory when she heard the wagon, too early for Wyatt to be back from checking the north pasture and coming fast. She climbed up to find Wyatt hauling a stranger off the wagon bed, the man's leg twisted at an unnatural angle, his face gray with pain and shock. "Elena!" Wyatt shouted. "I need the medical kit, hot water, and clean sheets, now!" She ran. By the time she returned with supplies, Wyatt had the stranger, a young man, barely 20, laid out on the kitchen table. Juniper stood in the doorway of her room, eyes wide with fear. "Sweetheart, go to your room and close the door," Elena said firmly. "Don't come out until I tell you." Juniper obeyed without argument. "What happened?" Elena asked, setting supplies on the table. "Found him about 2 miles north. His horse spooked at a cougar, threw him into a ravine. Legs broken in at least 2 places, maybe 3. Might have internal bleeding." Wyatt was already cutting away the man's pants leg, revealing bone-white flesh and a shin bent sickeningly wrong. "I need you to help me set this before the swelling gets worse." Elena had never set a broken bone in her life, but Wyatt's face said there was no one else, no other option, and this man would lose his leg or worse if they didn't act fast. "Tell me what to do," she said. The next hour was brutal. The young man, his name was Thomas, he managed to gasp out, screamed himself hoarse as Wyatt pulled the bone back into alignment while Elena held his shoulders down. She'd given Thomas a leather strap to bite on and a tin cup of whiskey to dull the pain, but neither helped much. The sound of bone grinding against bone would haunt her nightmares for weeks. When the leg was finally splinted and wrapped, Thomas passed out from the pain and shock. Wyatt sagged against the table, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the cold. "We can't move him," Wyatt said hoarsely. "He stays here until that leg starts healing. Could be weeks." "Where does he go?" Elena asked, already knowing the answer. "Your room. It's closest to the stove, warmest spot in the house. You'll have to bunk with Juniper." Elena nodded, too exhausted to argue. They moved Thomas as carefully as possible, Elena stripping the bed down to bare mattress and remaking it with clean sheets while Wyatt carried the unconscious man. Once Thomas was settled, Elena checked his pulse, thready but steady, and covered him with extra blankets. "You did good," Wyatt said quietly from the doorway. "Most people would have fainted or run. You stayed." "Where was I going to run to?" Elena managed a weak smile. "This is my home too." Something flickered in Wyatt's expression. Before he could respond, a knock came at the front door. Sharp, official. Wrong. They exchanged glances. Nobody visited the ranch unannounced in winter. Nobody knocked like that unless they brought trouble. Wyatt opened the door to find Sheriff Coleman on the porch, snow-dusting his shoulders, his expression grim. Behind him stood a man Elena had never seen before, well-dressed in city clothes with cold eyes and a lawyer's calculating face. "Hale," the sheriff said. "We need to talk. Can we come in?" "Depends what this is about." Wyatt didn't move from the doorway. "It's about the child, Juniper." The stranger spoke up, his voice clipped and precise. "I'm Harold Morrison, attorney representing Mr. Charles Fletcher. Mr. Fletcher is Juniper's biological father, and he's filed for custody." The world tilted sideways. Elena grabbed the door frame for support. Wyatt had gone absolutely still, his face draining of color. "Charles Fletcher is dead," Wyatt said flatly. "Or might as well be. He abandoned my sister when she got pregnant. Never sent money, never checked if his daughter was alive or dead. He has no rights here." "Actually," Morrison said with the smugness of a man who knows he holds all the legal cards, "Mr. Fletcher is very much alive and recently remarried. He and his new wife are eager to provide Juniper with a proper home, one with 2 parents, financial stability, and all the advantages a child deserves." "She has 2 parents," Elena said, finding her voice. "She has us." Morrison's eyes flicked to her dismissively. "You're the mail order bride, correct? Married to Mr. Hale for what, 3 months now? Hardly a stable parental situation. Whereas Mr. Fletcher can provide education, social connections, a future." "Get off my property," Wyatt said, his voice deadly quiet. "Mr. Hale, I'm here in an official capacity," Sheriff Coleman interjected, looking uncomfortable. "I have to serve these papers. Court hearing is set for January 15th. You'll need to appear with the child." He held out a folded document. Wyatt took it mechanically, staring at it like it might bite. "This is insane," Elena said. "Juniper's mother is dead. Charles Fletcher never wanted her. Why would he suddenly—" "Mr. Fletcher's new wife is barren," Morrison said bluntly. "They want a child to complete their family. And as the biological father, Mr. Fletcher has every right to claim his daughter." "She's not a possession to claim," Elena's voice rose. "She's a little girl who's been through hell. You can't just rip her away from everything she knows." "That's for the judge to decide, Mrs. Hale." Morrison tipped his hat with mock politeness. "We'll see you in court. I suggest you retain counsel, though I doubt you'll find many lawyers willing to take a case this clear-cut." He left. Sheriff Coleman lingered on the porch, his expression pained. "I'm sorry, Wyatt," he said quietly. "I truly am. But the law's the law. Fletcher's got rights as the father." "Rights?" Wyatt repeated numbly. "He's got rights." The sheriff left. Wyatt closed the door and stood there, staring at nothing, the custody papers crumpled in his white-knuckled fist. "Wyatt," Elena started. "She can't hear this," he interrupted, voice raw. "Juniper can't know. Not yet. Not until we figure out what to do." But Juniper had already heard. She appeared in the hallway, her small face stricken, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "They're going to take me away," she whispered. "They're going to make me leave." Elena was across the room in seconds, gathering the child into her arms. "No, sweetheart, no. We won't let them, I promise." "Everyone promises," Juniper sobbed. "Everyone says they'll stay and then they leave. Mama left, Papa left, and now you're going to let them take me away and I'll never see you again." "That's not true." Elena held her tighter. "We're going to fight this. We're going to do everything we can." "Can't fight the law," Juniper said with terrible adult clarity. "Uncle Wyatt said so. He said when Mama died that the law would make me go to Papa if he ever came back. And now he's back, and the law says I have to go." Wyatt's face crumpled. He dropped to his knees beside them, pulling both Elena and Juniper into his arms. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "God, Junie, I'm so sorry. I should have adopted you properly, should have done something to protect you." "Can't you adopt her now?" Elena asked desperately. "Make it legal before the hearing? Takes months, court approval, home visits, background checks. We don't have time." Wyatt's voice was breaking. "And even if we did, biological father's rights usually trump everything else. Fletcher has a legitimate claim." They sat there on the floor, the three of them clinging to each other, while Juniper cried herself into hiccuping exhaustion. When she finally fell asleep, still wrapped around Elena, Wyatt carried her to bed and stayed there stroking her hair until he was sure she wouldn't wake. Elena made coffee, neither of them would drink, and sat at the table reading through the custody papers with growing horror. The case was airtight. Charles Fletcher, respectable businessman with property and connections, married to a woman of good family, could provide education, opportunity, everything a child needed. Versus Wyatt Hale, struggling rancher with a hasty marriage to a former mail-order bride. No contest. "We need a lawyer," she said when Wyatt emerged from Juniper's room. "Someone good, someone who can fight this." "We can't afford a good lawyer, barely afford any lawyer." Wyatt slumped into a chair. And Morrison was right. Most won't even take the case. Father's rights are nearly absolute in Wyoming law. "There has to be something." "There isn't." Wyatt's voice was flat with defeat. "I've been through this already in my head. Every angle, every possibility. Unless Fletcher is proven unfit, drunk, violent, criminal, the judge will give him custody. And Fletcher's smart. He's been building his case, making sure he looks like the perfect father. We don't stand a chance." Elena stared at him, at this man who'd fought off 3 drunk men to protect her, who'd married her to keep her safe, who'd punched Silas doormen for insulting her. This man who never quit, never backed down, never accepted defeat. And he was giving up. "No," she said. "Elena, no." She stood up, slamming her hands on the table. "I didn't survive St. Louis and Silas Dorman and a Wyoming winter just to watch you roll over and let some stranger steal our daughter. Juniper is ours. She belongs with us. And we are going to fight like hell to keep her." "With what?" Wyatt spread his hands helplessly. We have no money, no influence, no legal standing. We have love. Elena's voice shook but held firm. We have 3 months of showing up every single day. We have a child who calls us mama and papa, who trusts us, who's finally starting to heal because of us. That has to count for something. It doesn't, not in a courtroom. Then we make it count. Elena paced, her mind racing. We find witnesses, people who've seen us with Juniper, who can testify that we're good parents. We document everything, her health, her happiness, how much she's improved since living with us. We research Fletcher, find out everything about him. Maybe he's not as perfect as Morrison claims. And if none of that works? Elena stopped pacing and looked directly at Wyatt. Then we run. We take Juniper and we disappear. Canada, California, anywhere Fletcher can't find us. I'd rather be a fugitive with my daughter than watch her be dragged away to live with a man who never wanted her until she became convenient. Wyatt stared at her like he'd never seen her before. You'd do that? Risk everything? For Juniper? Yes, without hesitation. Elena's jaw set stubbornly. And don't try to talk me out of it. I know it's illegal and dangerous and could ruin all our lives, but that child is mine in every way that matters, and I protect what's mine. Something blazed to life in Wyatt's eyes. Hope, maybe, or determination, or something fiercer and more desperate. He stood up and crossed to her, taking her face in both his work-roughened hands. You're the strongest person I've ever met, he said roughly. And I'm grateful every day that you walked into our lives. Elena's breath caught. They were standing too close, the air between them charged with everything they'd left unsaid for months. She could see gold flecks in his dark eyes, could count the silver threads in his beard, could feel his breath warm on her face. Wyatt, she whispered. The kiss happened like lightning, sudden, overwhelming, inevitable. Wyatt's mouth found hers with desperate hunger, his hands sliding into her hair. Elena made a small sound and kissed him back just as fiercely. 3 months of longing and fear and hope pouring out in that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have. We agreed. Don't you dare apologize. Elena's hands fisted in his shirt. Don't you dare. I can't lose you both. Can't lose Juniper to Fletcher and can't lose you because I complicated things by... You didn't complicate anything. Elena pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Wyatt, I've been falling for you since the day you set that broken leg without flinching, since you defended me to Silas, since you showed me what it means to have a partner instead of a master. I'm in love with you, have been for weeks. And I know that's not part of our agreement. I know you didn't sign up for that, but I can't keep pretending anymore. Wyatt's expression transformed, shock giving way to something that looked almost like joy. You love me? Yes, you impossible man. I love you. Thank God. He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense. Because I've been in love with you since you stood up to those council members with snow in your hair and steel in your spine. Since you stayed up all night with Juniper through her nightmares. Since you made this house feel like a home instead of just a place I slept between work shifts. Elena laughed shakily, tears streaming down her face. We're idiots. Both of us, dancing around this for months. Terrified idiots, Wyatt corrected, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her jaw. But we're done pretending, right? Done keeping distance. Yes. God, yes. Elena wrapped her arms around his neck. We fight for Juniper together. We face Fletcher together. Whatever happens, we face it as an actual family. Not just for show. Deal. Wyatt held her close, his heart hammering against her ear. Though I have to say, our timing is terrible. Middle of a custody crisis is a hell of a time to finally admit we're in love. When have we ever had good timing? Elena pulled back to look at him. We got married to avoid scandal 3 hours after being cornered by the town council. This is practically routine by comparison. He laughed, a real laugh, the first she'd heard in days, and kissed her once more before reluctantly stepping back. We should probably check on Thomas and get some sleep. Tomorrow we start fighting. Thomas was still unconscious but stable, his fever manageable. Elena changed his bandages while Wyatt banked the fires for the night. Then, instead of retreating to separate rooms like they'd done for 3 months, They climbed into Wyatt's bed together. It was strange and wonderful and slightly awkward, figuring out how two people fit together after months of careful distance. But when Wyatt's arm settled around her waist and Elena's head found the hollow of his shoulder, it felt like coming home. "I love you," Wyatt murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Elena whispered back. They fell asleep, holding each other, gathering strength for the battle ahead. The next 6 weeks were brutal in ways that had nothing to do with Wyoming winter. They hired a lawyer, an older man named Samuel Garrett, who was honest enough to tell them their chances were slim, but determined enough to fight anyway. He cost more than they could afford, eating into savings meant for spring supplies. Elena sold her mother's pearl earrings, the only valuable thing she owned, to help cover the fees. Garrett started building their case. He interviewed neighbors, documented Juniper's routine, gathered medical records showing how much healthier she'd become under their care. He researched Charles Fletcher and came back with disturbingly little. The man was squeaky clean on paper. Successful merchant, respectable marriage, no criminal record or history of violence. "He's too clean," Elena said, staring at the reports. "Nobody's that perfect. There has to be something. If there is, we haven't found it." Garrett's expression was grim. "And we're running out of time. The hearing's in 3 weeks." They kept searching anyway, desperate for anything that might tip the scales. Wyatt rode into town twice a week, asking careful questions, following faint leads that went nowhere. Elena wrote letters to St. Louis contacts, trying to find anyone who knew Fletcher from his time there. Nothing. Meanwhile, Juniper was falling apart. She'd stopped eating properly, picking at her meals with haunted eyes. Her nightmares returned with vicious intensity. Every night she woke screaming, convinced that strangers were dragging her away. She refused to let Elena or Wyatt out of her sight, following them through the house like a terrified shadow. "Mama," she whispered one night, curled in Elena's lap, while Wyatt read aloud from a storybook. "If they make me go, will you forget about me?" "Never," Elena's voice broke. "We could never forget you, sweetheart. But you'll get new children, better ones, and you won't need me anymore." Juniper Brooks Hale. Wyatt set the book aside and knelt beside them. "Look at me. Look at us. You are not replaceable. You are not forgettable. You are our daughter, and nothing, not distance, not time, not any law in existence, will ever change that. Do you understand?" "But Papa's the law," Juniper said with terrible logic. "If the law says I have to go, then we'll break the law," Elena said firmly. "If we have to run away, if we have to hide, if we have to fight with everything we have, we will. You're not going to some stranger who decided he wants a convenient daughter. You're staying right here with us." The hearing arrived too fast and not fast enough. A gray morning in mid-January with snow threatening on the horizon. They dressed Juniper in her best dress, new, made by Elena's own hands, and braided her hair with shaking fingers. The child was silent and pale, her hand clutching Elena's with bruising force. The courthouse in Hollow Creek was small and drafty, packed with more spectators than Elena expected. Word had spread, apparently. The scandal of the mail-order bride and the hasty marriage was about to reach its dramatic conclusion, and everyone wanted a front-row seat. Charles Fletcher sat at the plaintiff's table with Morrison, looking every inch the respectable businessman, expensive suit, groomed hair, the perfect picture of concerned fatherhood. His wife sat behind him, a delicate woman in lavender silk with calculating eyes and a brittle smile. Wyatt and Elena sat with Garrett at the defendant's table, Juniper between them, trying to project confidence they didn't feel. The judge was a stern-faced woman named Margaret Thornton, known for her no-nonsense approach and strict interpretation of the law. She called the court to order and looked over her reading glasses at both parties. "This is a custody hearing regarding the minor child Juniper Margaret Brooks," she said crisply. "Mr. Fletcher, as the biological father, is petitioning for full custody. Mr. and Mrs. Hale, as current guardians, are contesting. Mr. Morrison, present your case." Morrison stood and launched into a polished presentation. Charles Fletcher was a devoted father who'd only recently learned his daughter survived childbirth complications. He'd been told the child died along with her mother, a lie perpetuated by the mother's family to keep him away. Now that he'd discovered the truth, he was eager to rectify this terrible wrong and provide his daughter with everything she deserved. He had financial means, a stable marriage, connections that would ensure excellent education and future opportunities. The Hales, while well-meaning, could offer none of these advantages. Garrett countered with their evidence: witness testimonies about Juniper's improved health and happiness, medical records, documentation of the Hales' commitment and care. But even as he spoke, Elena could see the judge's expression remain unmoved. Facts were facts. Fletcher was the biological father with superior resources. The Hales were guardians by accident, not law. "I'd like to call Juniper Brooks to the stand," Morrison said. "Absolutely not." Garrett shot to his feet. "Your Honor, the child is 4 years old. Subjecting her to direct examination is unnecessarily traumatic." "The child's preferences are relevant to this case," Judge Thornton said. "I'll allow it, but keep your questions age-appropriate, Mr. Morrison." Elena felt Juniper trembling. Wyatt looked like he wanted to commit violence, but there was nothing they could do as a bailiff led Juniper to the witness stand, lifting her up so she could see over the edge. She looked so small up there, so terrified. Elena wanted to scream. "Hello, Juniper," Morrison said with false warmth. "Do you know who that man is?" He pointed to Fletcher. Juniper shook her head mutely. "That's your papa, your real papa. He's been looking for you for a very long time. Wouldn't you like to live with your papa in a big house with lots of toys and pretty dresses?" Juniper's lip trembled. "I have a papa and a mama. They're right there." She pointed at Wyatt and Elena. "But sweetheart, Mr. Hale is your uncle, not your papa, and Mrs. Hale is, well, she's a stranger your uncle married. Don't you want to live with your real family?" "They are my real family." Juniper's voice rose, tears spilling over. "They're the ones who take care of me. They're the ones who stayed." "Juniper," Morrison said, his tone sharpening slightly, "your father can give you a much better life. More money, more opportunities." "I don't want money. I want my mama and papa." Juniper was sobbing now. "Please don't make me leave them. Please! They're all I have." "That's enough." Judge Thornton's voice cut through the courtroom like a whip. "Mr. Morrison, step back. Bailiff, please return the child to her guardians." Elena gathered Juniper into her arms, the child's sobs muffled against her shoulder. Wyatt wrapped them both in his embrace, his face carved from granite. Judge Thornton removed her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. "I'm going to take a 30-minute recess. When we return, I'll hear closing arguments and render my decision. Court is adjourned." The gavel fell like a death sentence. They spent the recess in a small waiting room trying to calm Juniper's hysterical crying. Nothing worked. She clung to Elena with desperate strength, begging them not to let the bad people take her away. Wyatt looked like his heart was being torn out. "We could run," he said quietly, meeting Elena's eyes over Juniper's head. "Right now. Out the back. We could disappear before and spend the rest of our lives as fugitives?" Garrett shook his head. "They'd find you eventually. And when they did, you'd lose any chance of ever seeing Juniper again. At least if we see this through, there's a possibility of appeals, of visitation." "I don't want visitation," Elena said fiercely. "I want my daughter home where she belongs." The bailiff knocked. "Court's reconvening. Time to go back." They filed back into the courtroom like condemned prisoners. Juniper had gone limp and silent, shut down completely, her eyes glazed with shock. Fletcher and his wife whispered to each other, looking victorious. Morrison shuffled his papers with smug confidence. Judge Thornton returned to the bench, her expression unreadable. "I've reviewed all evidence and testimony," she began. "This is not an easy case. On one hand, we have a biological father with legitimate rights and substantial resources. On the other, we have guardians who've provided exemplary care and genuine love. Legally, the father's claim should prevail. However, Elena's heart stopped. However, Judge Thornton continued, I'm troubled by several factors. Mr. Fletcher claims he only recently learned his daughter survived. Yet my own investigation shows he made no effort to locate the child or her mother in the years following her birth. He sent no financial support, made no inquiries, showed no interest until his recent remarriage. This suggests that his current petition may be motivated more by convenience than genuine paternal concern. Fletcher's face went red. Morrison started to object, but the judge held up a hand. Furthermore, the child's reaction today speaks volumes. She is clearly bonded to the Hales, considers them her parents, and is terrified of being separated from them. While a child's preferences are not determinative, they are relevant, especially given her age and trauma history. Elena didn't dare breathe. Wyatt's hand found hers under the table, squeezing hard enough to hurt. That said, the judge continued, and Elena's hope crumbled, I cannot simply ignore biological paternal rights without substantial cause. Mr. Fletcher is correct that he has a legal claim to his daughter. Therefore, I'm ruling as follows. Temporary custody will remain with Mr. and Mrs. Hale for a probationary period of 6 months. During this time, Mr. Fletcher will have supervised visitation rights, 1 day per month, supervised by a court-appointed social worker. If, at the end of 6 months, the situation remains stable and the child continues to thrive with the Hales, we'll reconvene to discuss permanent custody arrangements. If, however, Mr. Fletcher can demonstrate genuine paternal commitment and the child develops a bond with him, we'll revisit the custody arrangement. This gives everyone time to prove their claims and gives Juniper time to adjust. The gavel fell. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the courtroom erupted in chaos. Morrison shouting objections, Fletcher demanding immediate custody, spectators whispering and gasping. But Elena heard none of it. She was staring at the judge, at this stern woman who'd just given them 6 months, 6 more months with their daughter, 6 months to figure out how to make this permanent. 6 months to win. Thank you, she whispered, knowing the judge couldn't hear. Thank you. Outside the courthouse, Fletcher cornered them on the steps, his face twisted with rage. You think you've won? He snarled at Wyatt. 6 months, that's all you've got. And then I'm taking what's mine. That girl is my blood, my property. She's not property, Elena said coldly. She's a child. Your child, supposedly, though you've never acted like it. You've poisoned her against me, filled her head with lies. We've loved her, Wyatt interrupted. Something you've never bothered to do. And we're going to keep loving her for the next 6 months while you prove exactly why you don't deserve custody. They walked away, leaving Fletcher sputtering behind them. Juniper stirred in Elena's arms. Mama? She whispered. Do I have to go? Not today, sweetheart. Not for 6 whole months. You're coming home with us. Promise? I promise. Elena kissed her forehead. We're going home. All of us. Together. That night, after Juniper was finally asleep, exhausted from crying but safe in her own bed, Wyatt and Elena sat by the fire and allowed themselves to shake apart. 6 months, Wyatt said hoarsely. She gave us 6 months. It's enough. Elena leaned into his shoulder. It has to be enough. We'll make it enough. How? Fletcher's not going to give up. He'll use those visitation days to bond with her, to turn her against us. Then we make these 6 months count. Elena sat up, her jaw set with determination. We show the court and everyone else that Juniper belongs with us. We document every moment of happiness, every sign of thriving. We make it impossible for any judge to separate us. And if it's not enough? Elena met his eyes, steady and sure. Then we run. Like I said before, we take Juniper and we disappear. I meant it, Wyatt. I will not lose our daughter. We, Wyatt corrected softly. We will not lose our daughter. He pulled her close and they sat there in the firelight, holding each other, gathering strength for the fight ahead. They'd won a reprieve, nothing more. But for tonight, for now, their daughter was safe in her own bed, and they were together. It would have to be enough. The first supervised visitation happened on a bitter February morning, exactly 4 weeks after the custody hearing. Elena dressed Juniper in warm layers while the child stood rigid and silent, her small face pale with dread. I don't want to go, Juniper whispered for the 100th time. Please, Mama, please don't make me. I know, sweetheart. Elena's hands shook as she buttoned Juniper's coat. But we have to follow the judge's rules, just for a few hours. Then you come right back home to us. What if he keeps me? What if he doesn't let me come back? He can't. Wyatt knelt beside them, his voice firm despite the fear Elena could see in his eyes. The social worker will be right there the whole time. Mrs. Henderson, remember we met her last week? She's very nice, and her only job is to make sure you're safe. If anything feels wrong, you tell her, and at exactly 3 o'clock, we'll be waiting at the meeting place to bring you home. Promise? Juniper's voice was so small it broke Elena's heart. Promise. Wyatt pulled her into a fierce hug. You're our girl. Nothing changes that. They drove to town in heavy silence. The social worker, Mrs. Henderson, was waiting outside the general store with Charles Fletcher and his wife. Fletcher wore an obviously new smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. His wife, Millicent, looked impatient, her gloved hands folded primly at her waist. Right on time, Mrs. Henderson said cheerfully, trying to ease the tension. Juniper, sweetheart, you remember Mr. Fletcher? He's going to spend the afternoon with you, show you around town, maybe get you some peppermint sticks from the store. Doesn't that sound nice? Juniper pressed herself against Elena's legs and said nothing. Fletcher's smile tightened. Come here, daughter, don't be rude. She's not being rude, Elena said sharply. She's 4 years old and you're a stranger. Give her time. Time I wouldn't need if you hadn't poisoned her against me, Fletcher shot back. Mr. Fletcher, Mrs. Hale, please. Mrs. Henderson stepped between them. This helps no one. Juniper, how about you and I walk with Mr. Fletcher together? Your mama and papa will be right here at 3 o'clock. I promise. Juniper looked up at Elena, her eyes swimming with tears. Elena wanted to scoop her up, run for the wagon, drive until they crossed into Canada and never looked back. But that would mean losing permanently. So instead she crouched down and cupped Juniper's face in her hands. You are so brave, she whispered, the bravest girl I know. And in just a few hours you'll be back with us. Can you be brave for just a little while longer? Juniper nodded shakily. Elena kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the weight of her small body against hers. Then she had to let go and watch as Mrs. Henderson took Juniper's hand and led her toward Fletcher. The child looked back 3 times before they turned the corner and disappeared from view. Elena thought she might be sick right there in the street. Come on! Wyatt's arm came around her shoulders. We can't help her by standing here falling apart. Let's get coffee. Wait somewhere warm. They spent the next 4 hours in the small restaurant across from the general store, nursing coffee that grew cold and bitter, watching the clock crawl forward with agonizing slowness. Elena couldn't eat, couldn't sit still, couldn't think about anything except Juniper's terrified face. Wyatt stared at his hands, his jaw clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grinding. What if he's cruel to her? Elena said at one point. What if Mrs. Henderson isn't watching closely enough? What if... She'll be fine. Wyatt's voice was hollow with a conviction neither of them felt. She has to be fine. At exactly 2:45, they were back at the meeting spot. At 3 o'clock, Mrs. Henderson appeared with Juniper walking stiffly beside her. The moment Juniper saw Elena and Wyatt, she broke free and ran, launching herself into Elena's arms with enough force to nearly knock them both over. Mama, she sobbed. Mama, Mama, Mama. Elena held her tight, rocking back and forth, murmuring reassurances while her own tears soaked into Juniper's hair. Over the child's head, she met Mrs. Henderson's eyes. How did it go? Wyatt asked quietly. Mrs. Henderson's expression was carefully neutral. Mr. Fletcher was perfectly appropriate. They walked around town, he bought her candy, they visited the toy shop. No concerns from a legal standpoint. But, Elena prompted, hearing what the social worker wasn't saying. But the child was terrified the entire time. Wouldn't speak to him, wouldn't make eye contact, flinched every time he tried to touch her. Mrs. Henderson's professional mask slipped slightly. I've done this work for 15 years, Mrs. Hale. I know the difference between normal adjustment anxiety and genuine trauma response. That child is traumatized. Will that be in your report? Wyatt asked. It will be noted objectively. What the judge does with that information, she shrugged helplessly. I'll see you next month, same time. She left. Fletcher and his wife were nowhere to be seen. Elena carried Juniper to the wagon, the child still clinging with desperate strength, and they drove home in silence. That night, Juniper's nightmares were worse than ever. She woke screaming 3 times, each time convinced that strangers were breaking down the door to take her away. The 3rd time, Elena and Wyatt simply brought her into their bed, the one they now shared every night, and held her between them until dawn. I can't do this every month, Juniper whispered into the dark. I can't keep going to him. Please don't make me. We don't have a choice, sweetheart, Wyatt said gently. Not yet, but we're working on it, I promise. You always say you're working on it, Juniper said with heartbreaking weariness. But nothing changes. He keeps coming back, and one day he's going to take me away forever. Elena and Wyatt exchanged glances over her head. The same thought written clear on both their faces. What if she's right? The second visitation was worse than the first. Fletcher, frustrated by Juniper's continued silence, tried to force interaction, picking her up when she clearly didn't want to be touched, insisting she call him Papa, growing visibly angry when she refused. Mrs. Henderson intervened twice, and her report noted Fletcher's increasing impatience with the child's adjustment period. But it also noted that he'd committed no actual violations, just a father growing frustrated with a difficult daughter, not enough to revoke visitation rights. The third visitation, Fletcher brought expensive gifts, a porcelain doll with real hair, a music box that played tinkling melodies, a dress that cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe. Juniper accepted them with robotic politeness and left them all in the wagon when they got home. Elena found her later, curled up in the barn with the dress torn to shreds, the doll's face smashed against the wall. I hate him, Juniper said flatly when Elena found her. I hate him, and I hate her, and I hate that judge for making me see them. Why can't they just leave us alone? Oh, sweetheart. Elena sank down beside her in the hay. I know, I'm so sorry. Make it stop, Mama, please. You said you'd protect me. You promised. I'm trying. Try harder. Juniper's voice rose to a shout. You're the grown-ups. You're supposed to fix things, but you just keep making me go back to him, and he's awful, and he doesn't want me. He just wants to win, and I hate him. She dissolved into hysterical sobs. Elena held her daughter while she cried, feeling helpless and furious in equal measure. Wyatt found them an hour later, both cried out and exhausted, and carried Juniper inside without a word. That night, after Juniper finally slept, Elena and Wyatt sat at the kitchen table with Garrett, who'd ridden out despite the late hour after receiving an urgent message. We can't keep doing this to her, Elena said bluntly. These visitations are destroying her. She's regressed months in her healing. The nightmares are constant. She barely eats. She started pulling out her own hair when she thinks we're not looking. This is abuse, Garrett. Legal, court-ordered abuse. I agree, Garrett said heavily, and my report to the judge will reflect that. But Fletcher hasn't violated any rules. He's following the letter of the visitation order. Unless we can prove he's actively harming her during these visits. Her terror isn't proof enough? Wyatt's voice was dangerous. Her trauma? Her breakdown tonight? Legally? No. The court will say she's adjusting, that it takes time for children to bond with estranged parents, that we're the ones making it harder by clearly poisoning her against him. Garrett ran a hand through his thinning hair. I've been doing this work for 30 years. I know what you're up against. The system is built to favor biological parents, especially fathers with means. And Fletcher knows exactly how to play it. He's careful, controlled, never crosses a line we can use against him. So what do we do? Elena demanded. Just keep sending her into hell once a month and hope the judge eventually sees reason? We keep documenting everything. Her reactions, her nightmares, her regression. We build a case that these visitations are harmful to her mental health. And we hope that by the end of 6 months, the evidence is overwhelming enough that Judge Thornton rules in our favor. And if she doesn't? Wyatt asked quietly. Garrett met his eyes. Then you'll have to make some very difficult decisions about what comes next. After the lawyer left, Elena stood at the window, staring out at the darkness. Behind her, she heard Wyatt moving, pouring coffee, his footsteps heavy with exhaustion and grief. I've been thinking about Canada, she said without turning around. There's a rail line that runs north through Montana. 3 days travel, maybe 4 with a child. We could disappear into the territories, change our names, start over. I've been thinking about it too, Wyatt admitted. But Elena, if we run, I know, we'd be fugitives, criminals. We could never come back, never contact anyone we knew, spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. She finally turned to face him. But at least we'd be together. At least Juniper would be safe and loved instead of property in a legal battle. She'd also grow up knowing we chose to break the law, that we're running from something. That could poison her as much as these visitations. Or it could show her that we loved her enough to risk everything. Elena moved to him, taking his hands. I'm not saying we do it now. I'm saying we prepare. Research the routes, set aside money, have a plan ready if the judge rules against us. Because Wyatt, I meant what I said before. I will not let them take our daughter. Our daughter, Wyatt repeated softly. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. God, I love hearing you say that. Even in the middle of all this hell, I love that she's ours. She's always been ours, Elena said. From the moment she climbed into my lap that first morning. We just didn't make it legal yet. What if we could? Elena pulled back to look at him. What? Adoption. Formal adoption. I know Garrett said it takes months, but what if we started the process now? Even if it's not complete before the final custody hearing, wouldn't it show the judge that we're committed? That this isn't just temporary guardianship? Hope flared painful in Elena's chest. Would Fletcher fight it? Probably, but he'd have to prove that denying the adoption is in Juniper's best interest. And how can he argue that when his own daughter is terrified of him? Wyatt's expression turned calculating. It's worth asking Garrett. Worth trying. They called the lawyer back the next day. He was skeptical, but agreed to file the adoption petition. The process was Byzantine: background checks, home visits, character references, financial statements. But Elena threw herself into it with desperate determination. She tracked down references from St. Louis, from neighbors, from the doctor who'd treated Juniper. She documented every meal cooked, every nightmare soothed, every moment of care over the past 6 months. She built a case not in legal terms but in love, proof written in 1,000 small actions that Juniper belonged with them. The fourth visitation arrived too soon. This time, Fletcher announced he wanted to take Juniper to his home for the afternoon, still supervised, but in his territory instead of neutral ground. Absolutely not, Wyatt said flatly when Mrs. Henderson delivered the news. It's within his rights under the visitation order, she said apologetically. The judge specified supervised visits but didn't restrict location. Mr. Fletcher's lawyer is arguing that seeing his home environment will help Juniper adjust. It'll traumatize her further, Elena protested. She can barely handle a few hours in public. You want us to send her into his actual house? I don't want anything, Mrs. Hale, but legally, I can't prevent it. Mrs. Henderson's expression was pained. I'll be there the entire time. If anything seems wrong, I'll intervene immediately and note it in my report. Juniper heard this news with terrifying calm. She didn't cry, didn't protest, just nodded and went to her room to change into her visiting clothes. When Elena checked on her, she found the child staring at the wall with hollow eyes. Juniper, sweetheart? It's fine, Mama. Juniper's voice was flat, emotionless. I know what to do now. I just have to be quiet and polite and not make him angry. Then he'll bring me back and I can come home. It's fine. It was not fine. Nothing about this was fine. But what could Elena say? How could she tell her 4-year-old daughter that sometimes the world was cruel and unjust and there was nothing anyone could do to fix it? She couldn't. So instead, she hugged Juniper tight and whispered, You're so brave. So brave. And we love you more than anything. I know, Juniper said, but she sounded like she was reciting words learned by rote, not expressing feelings she believed. The afternoon lasted an eternity. Elena cleaned the already spotless cabin 3 times. Wyatt chopped enough wood to last through next winter. Neither of them could sit still, couldn't think about anything except Juniper in that house, with Fletcher and his cold-eyed wife. When 3 o'clock finally came, they were at the meeting point 30 minutes early. Mrs. Henderson arrived exactly on time, but Juniper wasn't with her. Elena's heart stopped. Where is she? Wyatt's voice was deadly quiet. Where's my daughter? She's fine, Mrs. Henderson said quickly. Mr. Fletcher asked for an additional hour. The visit was going well, and he thought, You let him keep her past the agreed time? Elena couldn't breathe. We had a court order, 3 hours, supervised, then she comes home. You agreed, and Mr. Fletcher pointed out that the order doesn't specify exact timing, only supervised contact. He filed a request for extended visitation, which I approved on site as the supervising officer. Mrs. Henderson looked defensive now. It's actually a good sign, Mrs. Hale. It means Juniper is adjusting, becoming more comfortable. Or it means she's shut down completely and stopped fighting because she's given up. Wyatt interrupted. Where are they? We're going to get our daughter. Now. I can't allow that. If you interfere with court-ordered visitation, then we'll deal with the consequences. Wyatt was already moving toward the wagon. But we're not leaving her there one more minute. They drove to Fletcher's house, a large, well-maintained property on the good side of town. Mrs. Henderson followed in her own buggy, protesting the entire way. Elena's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to keep from clawing at something. Fletcher answered the door with that false smile, but it slipped when he saw their expressions. Mr. and Mrs. Hale, I wasn't expecting— Where's Juniper? Elena pushed past him into the house. Juniper, sweetheart, where are you? She found her daughter in the parlor, sitting rigidly on a velvet settee with Millicent Fletcher beside her. Juniper was wearing a different dress, expensive, frilly, nothing she would ever choose herself. Her hair had been redone in elaborate curls. Her face was blank, empty, gone. Juniper. Elena crossed the room and knelt in front of her. Baby, are you all right? Juniper's eyes focused slowly, as if coming back from somewhere very far away. When she saw Elena, something cracked in that blank expression, and she launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around Elena's neck with desperate strength. I want to go home, she whispered. Please, Mama, please take me home. We're going, right now. Elena stood with Juniper in her arms and turned to face Fletcher and his wife. What did you do to her? We did nothing, Millicent said coldly. We tried to make her comfortable, gave her a nice dress, attempted to engage her in polite conversation. She was the one who refused to participate. She's 4 years old, Elena's voice rose. She's not supposed to participate in your delusions of playing perfect family. She's terrified, she's traumatized, and you— She stopped, breathing hard, knowing that anything else she said could be used against them in court. We're leaving, Wyatt said from the doorway. His hand rested on something at his belt, not quite touching his knife, but close enough to be a message. And Mrs. Henderson will be filing a report about this unauthorized extension and the child's condition when we found her. Actually, Mrs. Henderson said reluctantly, I approved the extension, and from what I observed, nothing inappropriate occurred. Then you observed wrong, Elena said flatly. Look at her. Really look. Does this seem like a child who's adjusting, or does this seem like a child who's learned to dissociate to survive? Mrs. Henderson's expression flickered with something that might have been doubt, but she just said, I'll note your concerns in my report. Mr. Fletcher, we'll schedule next month's visitation at the regular time. They drove home in silence. Juniper didn't cry, didn't speak, just lay against Elena's chest with her eyes closed and her breathing too shallow. When they got to the cabin, she climbed into bed fully dressed and turned her face to the wall. Elena sat beside her, stroking her hair, while Wyatt paced the main room like a caged wolf. This can't continue, he said finally. Garrett, the adoption, the documentation, none of it matters if she doesn't survive the next 2 months to see the final hearing. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time to stop playing by their rules. Wyatt's jaw was set. Maybe it's time to run. Elena looked down at Juniper's small, still form, at her daughter who was slowly breaking under the weight of a legal system that didn't see her pain, didn't value her terror, didn't care that she was being destroyed in the name of paternal rights. Maybe you're right, she said quietly. But if we run smart, not in panic. We plan, we prepare, and we wait until the moment gives us the best chance. When will that be? I don't know yet. Elena pulled the blanket higher over Juniper's shoulders. But I'll know it when I see it, and when that moment comes, we move fast and we don't look back. 3 days later, the moment arrived in the form of a letter delivered by a nervous-looking courier. Elena signed for it with shaking hands and opened it in the kitchen with Wyatt reading over her shoulder. It was from Fletcher's lawyer. A motion to modify the custody arrangement. Fletcher was petitioning the court to increase visitation to weekly instead of monthly and to include overnight visits beginning immediately. No, Elena said. The word came out flat, final. No, absolutely not. We fight this, Wyatt said. Garrett can file objections that will take weeks to be heard while the court might grant temporary approval in the meantime. We've seen how this works, Wyatt. The system is designed to favor Fletcher, and her voice broke. We can't keep doing this to her. We can't keep feeding our daughter to wolves and hoping the judge eventually notices she's bleeding. Wyatt stared at the letter for a long moment. Then he walked to the fireplace, pulled down a loose stone from the chimney, and removed a small leather pouch. Inside was money. More than Elena expected. Enough for travel, for starting over. I've been saving since the first hearing, he said quietly. Just in case. I've got contacts in Montana, people who owe me favors. They can get us across the border, help us disappear. But Elena, he met her eyes. Once we do this, there's no coming back. No changing our minds. We'll be fugitives forever. Are you sure? Elena thought about Juniper's blank face in Fletcher's parlor, about the nightmares, the regression, the slow death of the bright, trusting child they'd rescued from grief. She thought about 6 more months of visitations that would destroy what little remained of her daughter's spirit. And she thought about a life on the run, hard, uncertain, dangerous, but together, safe, free. I'm sure, she said. We leave tonight. They spent the next hours in controlled chaos, packing only what they could carry, sorting through possessions to decide what was essential and what had to be left behind. Elena found herself crying over the strangest things, a mixing bowl she'd used every day, a quilt she'd made last winter, the curtains she'd sewn with such pride, pieces of the home she'd built, the life she'd finally thought was hers. But Juniper was worth more than any of it. They waited until well after dark, until they were certain the roads would be empty. Wyatt hitched the horses to the wagon and covered the bed with canvas. Elena dressed Juniper in layers of warm clothing, the child moving with sleepy confusion. Where are we going? Juniper asked. On an adventure, Elena said, forcing brightness into her voice. Somewhere far away where we can all be together without anyone bothering us. Forever? Forever. They were loading the last of their supplies when light blazed across the yard. Lanterns, multiple riders, voices shouting. Elena's heart plummeted. They'd waited too long. Someone had seen the letter, made calculations, anticipated their move. Sheriff Coleman dismounted first, his expression grim. Behind him came 3 deputies. And behind them, looking triumphant, came Charles Fletcher and his lawyer. Going somewhere, Hale? The sheriff asked. Just taking my family on a trip, Wyatt said carefully. Nothing wrong with that. At midnight? With all your possessions packed? Fletcher stepped forward, his smile vicious. I think not. Sheriff, these people are attempting to flee with my daughter. I demand you arrest them for attempted kidnapping. Now hold on, Coleman said. Let's not jump to conclusions. They're packed to run. Fletcher gestured at the wagon. Look at them. They were going to steal my child and disappear across the border. This is kidnapping, Sheriff. Arrest them, now. Elena pulled Juniper behind her, the child whimpering in fear. Wyatt moved to stand beside them, his body a shield. We're not kidnapping anyone, Wyatt said. Juniper is in our legal custody. We have the right to travel with her. Not when there's an active custody case and a pending motion that requires the child to remain in the jurisdiction, Fletcher's lawyer said smoothly. The Hales have clearly demonstrated intent to flee. Sheriff, you're obligated to intervene. Coleman looked between them all, conflict written clear on his weathered face. He was a decent man, Elena knew. A fair man. But he was also the law, and the law was about to destroy them. I'm sorry, Wyatt, he said, finally. But I can't let you leave, not like this. You'll have to come into town, appear before the judge in the morning, sort this all out properly. And if we refuse? Wyatt's hand moved to his rifle, still secured on the wagon. Then I arrest you for resisting lawful orders, and the child goes with Mr. Fletcher tonight. Coleman's voice was heavy with regret. Don't make this worse than it has to be. They were trapped, caught between losing Juniper tonight or losing their freedom and facing charges that would guarantee Fletcher got custody. Either way, they lost. Elena felt the weight of that reality settle over her like a shroud. This was it, the end of their fight, the moment when all their desperate planning amounted to nothing because the system had finally cornered them with no escape. Then a small voice spoke up from behind her. I don't want to go with him. Everyone turned to look at Juniper. She stood straight despite her trembling, her small face set with determination that broke Elena's heart. "I don't want to go with the man who says he's my papa," Juniper said, louder now. "He's not my papa. Papa Wyatt is my papa, and Mama Elena is my mama. They're the ones who love me. They're the ones who stayed. And if you make me go with that man, I'll run away. I'll keep running away until I get back to my real family, because they're mine and I'm theirs, and you can't change that with papers and judges and rules." Silence crashed down. Even Fletcher seemed stunned by the fierce conviction in her small voice. "The child has been manipulated," he started. "The child," Judge Thornton's voice cut through the night, "has made her feelings abundantly clear." Everyone spun around. The judge sat in a small buggy at the edge of the yard, wrapped in a heavy cloak, Mrs. Henderson beside her. How long had they been there? How much had they heard? "Your Honor," Fletcher said quickly, "I can explain—" "You can be quiet," Thornton said crisply. "Sheriff Coleman, thank you for your timely message. Mrs. Henderson, your concerns were well-founded." She climbed down from the buggy and approached Elena and Wyatt, her sharp eyes taking in the packed wagon, their desperate faces, Juniper clinging to Elena's skirts. "You were really going to run," she said quietly. "Yes, Your Honor," Elena said, seeing no point in lying. "We were going to take our daughter and disappear rather than watch her be destroyed by this custody battle." "Your daughter," Thornton repeated. "Not Mr. Fletcher's." "Ours," Wyatt said firmly, "in every way that matters." The judge turned to look at Fletcher. "And you, Mr. Fletcher, you filed a motion for increased visitation knowing full well this child is terrified of you, knowing that each visit traumatizes her further, knowing that you're causing her genuine harm. Why?" "She's my daughter." "She's your biological offspring," Thornton corrected coldly. "There's a difference. I've read Mrs. Henderson's reports. All of them. Including the ones where she noted concerns that she was pressured not to emphasize. I've reviewed the documentation the Hales submitted for their adoption petition, and I've spent the last 3 days conducting my own investigation into your character, Mr. Fletcher." Fletcher's face went pale. "Did you know," Thornton continued conversationally, "that you have another child? A son, born 7 years ago to a woman in Denver. A woman you also abandoned when she became inconvenient, or that you've been sued 3 times for breach of contract in business dealings, or that your current wife married you specifically because her family's money was running out and she needed a provider." The judge's smile was knife-sharp. "You're not interested in Juniper because you love her or even want her. You're interested because your wife needs a child to maintain her social status, and claiming your biological daughter is cheaper and faster than adoption. Am I wrong?" Fletcher said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Thornton turned back to Elena and Wyatt. "You were prepared to become fugitives for this child." "Yes," Elena said simply. "I'd do anything for her. We both would. Even though it would mean giving up this home, this life, everything you've built." "She's our daughter," Wyatt said. "She's worth more than everything else combined." The judge studied them for a long moment. Then she looked down at Juniper. "Child, do you understand what's happening here?" "Yes, ma'am," Juniper said, her voice small but steady. "The man wants to take me away from my mama and papa, but I don't want to go. I want to stay with my family." "And if I ruled that you had to go with Mr. Fletcher, what would you do?" "I'd run away," Juniper said with absolute conviction, "over and over until I got back home, because they love me and I love them, and that's what makes us a family. Not blood, not papers, love." Out of the mouths of babes, Elena thought, her throat closing with tears. Judge Thornton nodded slowly. Then she turned to face Fletcher and his lawyer, her expression as cold as the winter night. "Motion for increased visitation denied," she said crisply. "Furthermore, I'm terminating all visitation rights effective immediately. The Hales adoption petition is granted expedited hearing status. We'll reconvene in my chambers tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock to finalize permanent custody. Mr. Fletcher, I strongly suggest you don't contest this ruling unless you want me to investigate child abandonment charges. Are we clear?" Fletcher's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. His lawyer looked equally stunned. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," the lawyer tried. This entire case has been irregular, Thornton snapped. I've watched a biological father use the court system to terrorize a child for months, while two people who genuinely love her have been forced to stand by helplessly. I'm done watching. The law is meant to protect children, not deliver them to the highest bidder or the most persistent parent. And in this case, protection means staying with the Hales, permanently. Any objections can be filed with the appeals court, after I've already signed the final adoption papers. She turned to Elena and Wyatt, and her expression softened slightly. Go inside, she said gently. Unpack your wagon. This is your home, and that child is your daughter. As of 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, it will be legal and permanent, and no one will ever be able to challenge it again. You have my word. Elena couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process that this nightmare might actually be ending. Wyatt found his voice first. Thank you, Your Honor. We'll be there at 9. See that you are. Thornton climbed back into her buggy. And Hales? Next time you're planning to flee the jurisdiction, at least wait until after dark. She drove away. Fletcher and his lawyer followed after a moment of sputtering outrage, their threats and protests fading into the distance. The sheriff and his deputies left more slowly, Coleman pausing to tip his hat to Wyatt. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm glad it worked out this way. That little girl belongs with you. Then they were alone in the yard, the three of them, with a wagon packed for a journey they no longer needed to take. Juniper looked up at Elena with wide, hopeful eyes. Does this mean I can stay? Forever and ever? Forever and ever, Elena promised, pulling her close. You're ours now. Really, truly, legally ours. No one can ever take you away again. Juniper burst into tears. Not the scared, panicked crying of the past months, but huge, gulping sobs of relief and joy. Elena sank to the ground, holding her daughter while Wyatt wrapped them both in his arms, and they stayed like that for a long time, crying together in the cold Wyoming night. They were a family. Finally, permanently, irrevocably. And nothing would ever tear them apart again. They spent that night unpacking the wagon by lamplight, putting each item back in its place like an act of reclamation. Elena hung the curtains she'd nearly left behind. Wyatt returned his tools to the barn. Juniper carefully arranged her few toys on the shelf beside her bed, touching each one as if to confirm it was real, that she was really staying, that this was truly home forever. Mama, she called from her room, can I sleep with you and Papa tonight? Of course, sweetheart, Elena called back, always. They made a nest of blankets in the big bed, Juniper between them like she'd been so many nights during the worst of the nightmares. But tonight felt different. Tonight there was no fear coloring the darkness, no dread of what morning might bring. Just peace, hard-won and precious, settling over them like the first snow. I can't believe it's really over, Elena whispered into the dark. Juniper had fallen asleep almost instantly, exhausted by emotion. After all those months of fighting, of being terrified every single day, it's just over. Not quite over, Wyatt corrected softly. We still have to appear before the judge tomorrow. Make it official. Do you think she'll really grant the adoption, or was that just something she said to get Fletcher to back down? Judge Thornton doesn't strike me as someone who says things she doesn't mean. Wyatt's hand found Elena's over Juniper's sleeping form, their fingers intertwining. We'll be there at 9 o'clock. We'll sign whatever paper she puts in front of us, and then Juniper will be ours. Legally, permanently, irrevocably. Ours, Elena breathed. Our daughter. Our daughter, Wyatt agreed. And you, he paused, seeming to gather courage. You're my wife, not just on paper anymore, not just for convenience or protection. You're my wife because I love you, Elena, because I choose you. Every day, for the rest of my life, I choose you. Elena's eyes burned with tears. I choose you too. I think I have been since the day you punched Silas Dorman for insulting me. Maybe even before that. We really do have terrible timing, Wyatt said with a hint of humor. Declaring love in the middle of custody battles, planning to run away in the dead of night. Making marriage proposals on doorsteps while town councilmen watch, Elena added. Don't forget that one. How could I forget? That's when I knew I was in serious trouble. You stood there in your nightgown with snow in your hair, telling those men exactly what you thought of their judgment, and I thought, that's the woman I want beside me for the rest of my life. Even though I came with considerable baggage and legal complications, especially because of that, Wyatt leaned over Juniper to kiss Elena softly. You're strong, Elena, stronger than anyone I've ever met. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you came out the other side still capable of love, still willing to fight for what matters. That's not baggage, that's courage. Elena kissed him back, tasting salt from tears she hadn't realized were falling. We're going to be happy, she said fiercely. After everything we've been through, we've earned that. We're going to be so happy. Yes, Wyatt agreed. We are. They fell asleep tangled together, a family bound by choice and love and the fierce determination to never let anything tear them apart again. Morning came too fast and too slow at once. Elena woke before dawn and lay there listening to Wyatt's steady breathing, Juniper's soft snores, the familiar sounds of home. In a few hours, everything would be different. Legal, permanent, real in ways that even their marriage hadn't quite made real. She dressed carefully in her best dress, still worn, still mended in places, but clean and pressed. Wyatt wore the suit he'd been married in, brushing dust from the shoulders with hands that shook slightly. Juniper wore the new dress Elena had made her, the one that had been packed for their escape, blue calico with white flowers, a ribbon at the waist. She looked beautiful and solemn and achingly young. Are you nervous? Elena asked as she braided Juniper's hair. A little, Juniper admitted. What if the judge changed her mind? What if Mr. Fletcher comes back and makes her give me to him? That's not going to happen. Elena tied off the braid with a ribbon. Judge Thornton gave us her word, and I trust her. Do you really? Or are you just saying that to make me feel better? Elena turned Juniper around to face her. I really trust her. She could have ruled for Mr. Fletcher months ago. He had the law on his side, he had money, he had every advantage, but she gave us 6 months to prove we were the better choice. And last night, when she saw us pack to run away rather than lose you, she understood. She saw that we love you more than anything else in the world that matters to her. So yes, I really trust that she's going to make this official today. Okay. Juniper threw her arms around Elena's neck. I trust her too then, because you're always right about important things. I don't know about always, Elena said, hugging her back, but I'm right about this. They arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. Garrett was already there, pacing the hallway outside Judge Thornton's chambers, his usual professional composure slightly ruffled. You're actually early, he said when he saw them. I was worried you might run after all. We considered it, Wyatt admitted, but we decided to trust the judge. Good call. Garrett's expression shifted to something Elena couldn't quite read. Because she's been making calls since dawn, to the territorial governor, to family court magistrates in 3 counties, pulling in favors and applying pressure. She's expediting your adoption through channels that normally take months. By the time we leave her chambers this morning, Juniper will be your legal daughter, with all the paperwork filed and certified. No waiting period, no appeals process, no chance for Fletcher to challenge it. She can do that? Elena asked, hope and disbelief warring in her chest. She's doing that. Right now. Garrett smiled, genuinely this time. You made quite an impression on her, Mrs. Hale. Both of you. She told me this morning that in 30 years on the bench, she's never seen 2 people fight harder for a child who wasn't biologically theirs. She said you reminded her why she became a judge in the first place, to protect children, not legal abstractions. The door to the judge's chambers opened. A clerk stepped out. The judge will see you now. Elena's heart hammered as they filed into the wood-paneled room. Judge Thornton sat behind her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, surrounded by stacks of documents. She looked up as they entered and gestured to the chairs arranged in front of her desk. Sit, please. We have considerable paperwork to get through. They sat. Juniper climbed into Elena's lap without being asked, and the judge's stern expression softened slightly. First things first, Thornton said. Mr. Fletcher has withdrawn his custody petition. His lawyer delivered the formal notice an hour ago. He's also agreed to relinquish all parental rights, effective immediately, in exchange for my not pursuing child abandonment charges. So that threat is permanently eliminated. Elena felt dizzy with relief. Beside her, Wyatt exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. Second, the judge continued, I've reviewed and approved your adoption petition. All background checks came back clean, all character references were glowing, and frankly, the documentation you provided regarding Juniper's care was the most thorough I've seen in my career. Mrs. Hale, did you really log every meal, every bedtime story, every scraped knee for 6 months? Yes, Your Honor, Elena said. I wanted to prove that we were committed, that this wasn't just guardianship. We were already her parents in every way but legally. You proved it, Thornton shuffled papers. Which brings us to today's business. Mr. Garrett has prepared the final adoption documents. I need both of you to sign here, here, and here. She indicated lines on multiple forms. This legally terminates any connection between Juniper Margaret Brooks and Charles Fletcher, and establishes her as Juniper Margaret Hale, legal daughter of Wyatt Brooks Hale, and Elena Catherine Hale. Do you understand the permanence of what you're signing? Yes, they said in unison. Then sign. Elena signed with shaking hands, watching her name appear next to Wyatt's on line after line. Mother, father, legal guardians, adoptive parents. Each signature felt like a declaration, a promise, a vow more binding than any wedding ceremony. When the last document was signed, Judge Thornton gathered them all, affixed her seal and signature with decisive strokes, and handed a certified copy to Garrett. File these with the county clerk immediately, she instructed. I want them on record before noon. Garrett nodded and left quickly. Thornton turned back to Elena, Wyatt, and Juniper. Congratulations, she said simply. You're officially a family, legally, permanently, and, if you'll forgive an old judge, getting sentimental, beautifully. I've watched you fight for each other with a ferocity that most biological families never achieve. You've earned this. Thank you, Wyatt said roughly, for everything, for believing in us when the law said you shouldn't, for seeing past the surface to what really mattered. Thank me by being good parents to that child. Thornton looked at Juniper, who was staring up at her with wide, wondering eyes. And you, young lady, you were very brave through all of this, braver than many adults I know. Your parents are lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have them, Juniper said softly. They saved me. You saved each other, the judge corrected. That's what families do. Now go home, celebrate, and don't come back to my courtroom unless it's for something pleasant, like a marriage anniversary or to show me baby pictures. They left the courthouse in a daze. The sun had broken through the morning clouds, painting everything gold. Elena kept touching the certified adoption papers in her pocket, needing the physical proof that this was real. We should do something, Wyatt said as they climbed into the wagon. Mark the occasion somehow. Celebrate. Can we go home? Juniper asked. I just want to go home and know that it's really home forever now, that nobody can make me leave. Then that's what we'll do. Elena kissed the top of her head. We'll go home. The ride back to the ranch felt different somehow, lighter, brighter, as if the landscape itself was celebrating with them. When they pulled into the yard, everything looked exactly the same and completely transformed. The cabin was still rough-hewn logs and patched windows. The barn still needed repairs. The fences still sagged in places. But it was theirs, their home, their land, their life, and nobody could ever take it away. Elena spent the afternoon baking, a cake with the last of their good flour and sugar, something sweet to mark the sweetness of the day. Juniper helped, getting more flour on herself than in the bowl, laughing with a freedom Elena hadn't heard in months. Wyatt came in from chores smelling of horses and hay, and instead of washing up immediately, he swept them both into a hug that lifted them off their feet. My girls, he said into Elena's hair. My family. They ate cake for dinner, impractical and perfect, sitting around the table that had witnessed so many meals, so many quiet moments of becoming a family without quite knowing it yet. Juniper told elaborate stories about what she'd do now that she could stay forever. Plant a garden in spring, learn to ride Wyatt's big mare, get a kitten to keep in the barn. Her plans stretched into years, into a future she'd been too frightened to imagine before. After dinner, after Juniper was tucked into bed with promises that yes, they'd still be here in the morning, and yes, this was really forever, Elena and Wyatt sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up, Elena said. that this is all some beautiful dream, and I'll open my eyes to find myself back on that train platform, freezing to death. You're not dreaming. Wyatt pulled her close. This is real. We're real. That little girl sleeping in the next room is our daughter, and we get to watch her grow up. We get to be her parents. We won. We did. Elena leaned into his warmth. After everything, all the fear and fighting and desperate plans, we actually won. You know what the best part is? Wyatt's voice was soft with wonder. This isn't the end of the story. This is the beginning. We get to build a life now. A real life without looking over our shoulders or counting down to the next crisis. Just life. Normal, boring, beautiful life. With all the normal, boring, beautiful things, Elena smiled. Morning coffee and evening chores and watching Juniper grow, teaching her to read better, to sew, to ride, dealing with childhood illnesses and scraped knees and temper tantrums. All of it. All of it, Wyatt agreed. And maybe, he paused, seeming to gather courage, maybe eventually there'll be more brothers or sisters for Juniper, if you want that. Yes. Elena didn't let him finish. Yes, I want that. I want everything with you. A house full of noise and chaos and love. I want to grow old on this ranch watching our grandchildren play in that yard. I want all of it. Even the hard parts, the Wyoming winters and the money troubles and the 100 things that will inevitably go wrong. Especially the hard parts. Elena turned to face him. Because we've already survived the worst things, Wyatt. We survived the platform and the custody battle and all the terror in between. Everything else is just weather. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I love you, Wyatt said. I don't think I say it enough, but I love you, Elena Hale. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you fight for what matters. I love how you turned this house into a home. I love watching you with Juniper, seeing you be the mother I knew you'd be from the moment she climbed into your lap that first morning. I love you. Everything about you. I love you too. Elena's voice caught. I love your quiet kindness, the way you protect without smothering. I love how you see people, really see them, not just what's on the surface. I love that you looked at a frozen stranger on a train platform and decided she was worth saving. I love that you look at Juniper and see your daughter, not some obligation you inherited. I love you, Wyatt Hale, and I'm so grateful I get to spend the rest of my life loving you. They sat there long into the night, wrapped in each other and in the knowledge that they'd built something rare and precious. Not perfect. Nothing real was ever perfect, but real and chosen and worth every moment of fear it had taken to get here. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and turning the valley green with startling speed. Elena planted a garden with Juniper's enthusiastic help, teaching her the names of seeds and how deep to press them into the earth. Wyatt repaired fences and brought in new stock, 3 milk cows, a dozen chickens, 2 pigs that Juniper immediately named and refused to think of as future bacon. Life settled into rhythms both old and new. Morning coffee and breakfast together, Wyatt's kiss goodbye before he headed out to work. Juniper's lessons at the kitchen table while Elena kneaded bread or mended clothes. Lunch brought Wyatt back in, dusty and tired, but always with a smile for his girls. Afternoons were for chores and play in equal measure. Elena teaching Juniper to sew while Wyatt taught her to ride, all of them working together in the garden, laughter floating across the valley. Evenings were for stories and songs, for Juniper's elaborate drawings that now featured 3 stick figures holding hands in front of their house, always smiling. For quiet conversations between Elena and Wyatt after their daughter was asleep, planning futures and dreaming dreams that no longer felt impossible. The town's gossip eventually died down, replaced by new scandals and fresh meat for the rumor mill. A few families even reached out with tentative friendship, a neighboring ranch wife bringing over preserves, the shopkeeper's daughter inviting Juniper to play. Not everyone, and not overnight. But slowly, carefully, the Hales found their place in the community. Silas Dorman left town in April, his own scandals finally catching up with him. Elena felt nothing when she heard. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a distant sense that a chapter had finally closed completely. Charles Fletcher, they heard through Garrett, had quickly moved on to other schemes. His wife left him 6 months later, taking half his assets. He never asked about Juniper again. Mrs. Henderson stopped by in May, officially closing their case file. She found Juniper in the garden, dirty and laughing, helping Elena transplant tomato seedlings while Wyatt built a trellis nearby. The scene was so ordinary, so perfectly domestic, that the social worker actually teared up. "I just needed to see for myself that it worked out," she said. "That she's happy." "She's more than happy," Elena said, watching Juniper chase a butterfly through the rows of vegetables. "She's home." "Yes," Mrs. Henderson agreed. "She really is. You know, in 15 years of this work, I've seen a lot of placements. Most are adequate, some are good. Very few are—" She gestured helplessly at the scene before them. "This, perfect in all the ways that matter." "We're not perfect," Wyatt said from his work on the trellis, "but we love her. That's enough." "More than enough," Mrs. Henderson gathered her things. "I won't bother you again. This case is closed, permanently, with the highest recommendation in my report. If you ever need anything, character reference, legal support, anything at all, you just send word." She left. Elena and Wyatt exchanged glances over Juniper's head, matching smiles of satisfaction and relief. "We really did it," Elena said. "We built the life we wanted." "We're building it," Wyatt corrected. "Still building it, every day." Summer arrived in waves of heat and abundance. The garden flourished under Elena and Juniper's care, producing more vegetables than they could eat. Elena learned to can and preserve, filling the root cellar with jars of tomatoes and beans and pickles that glowed like jewels in the dim light. Wyatt brought in a good crop of hay, enough to see the animals through next winter with some to sell. They weren't rich, would probably never be rich, but for the first time in years they were comfortable, secure, safe. In August, Elena realized she was pregnant. She knew before she missed her monthly courses, knew from the way her breasts ached and smells made her queasy, and she cried at the smallest things. She waited a week to tell Wyatt, needing to be absolutely certain, needing to wrap the knowledge around herself like a secret treasure. When she finally told him, after Juniper was asleep, sitting on their bed with his hands in hers, he went absolutely still. "A baby?" he said, voice hushed with wonder. "We're having a baby." "Yes?" Elena searched his face for any sign of regret or fear. "Are you happy? I know we didn't plan—" "Happy?" Wyatt laughed, the sound cracking with emotion. "Elena, I can't even find words. Yes, I'm happy, I'm terrified and overwhelmed and so happy I could burst." He pulled her close, cradling her like she was made of glass, and she felt him shaking with tears he was trying to hold back. "We're going to have a baby," he whispered into her hair. "Our baby. A little brother or sister for Juniper. God, Elena, we get to do this. We get to build this family." They told Juniper the next morning over breakfast. Her reaction was pure, uninhibited joy, shrieking and dancing and immediately launching into plans for the baby's name, what toys she'd share, how she'd teach the baby everything important. "I'm going to be the best big sister," she declared with fierce conviction. "I'm going to protect them and love them and make sure they never feel scared or alone because they'll have me, just like I have you and Papa." Elena gathered her close, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to be an amazing big sister. The baby is so lucky to have you." The pregnancy was harder than Elena expected. Morning sickness that lasted all day, exhaustion that made simple tasks feel impossible, aches in places she didn't know could ache. But Wyatt was patient and gentle, taking over more of the household work without complaint. And Juniper, in her earnest 5-year-old way, tried to help however she could, bringing Elena water, reading to her from the primer Wyatt had bought, drawing pictures of what she imagined the baby would look like. Winter came early that year, and with it came the baby. Elena went into labor on a December morning while snow fell thick and fast outside. Wyatt sent Juniper to stay with the neighboring ranch family and rode for the midwife in town, pushing through drifts that threatened to swallow both horse and rider. Elena labored through the day and into the evening, the pain coming in waves that made her previous suffering seem trivial by comparison. But when Wyatt finally returned with Mrs. Porter, the midwife, everything moved quickly. The baby, a girl, perfect and furious, was born just after midnight, screaming her arrival into the world with impressive volume. "She's got a set of lungs on her," Mrs. Porter said with approval, cleaning the infant and wrapping her in soft blankets. "And look at all that dark hair. She's beautiful, Mrs. Hale. Absolutely beautiful." Elena held her daughter, her second daughter, her blood daughter, and felt something fundamental shift in her chest. She'd loved Juniper with fierce maternal devotion, but this was different. Not better, not stronger, just different. This child had grown under her heart, shared her blood, been part of her body. The miracle of it overwhelmed her. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." The baby quieted at her voice, dark eyes trying to focus. Wyatt sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Elena, staring at their daughter with naked wonder. "She's perfect," he said hoarsely. "Elena, we made her. We made a person." "We did." Elena leaned into his shoulder. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names for months, but never settled on one that felt right. Now, looking at this tiny, perfect person, Elena knew exactly what she wanted. "Margaret," she said, "after Juniper's mother, your sister, the woman who gave us Juniper in the first place. It feels right." Wyatt's eyes filled with tears. "Margaret Rose Hale. Maggie for short." "Maggie?" Elena tested the name, watching her daughter's expression. "What do you think, little Maggie? Is that who you are?" The baby yawned, revealing tiny pink gums, and Elena laughed through her tears. "I think that's a yes." They brought Juniper home the next morning. She burst through the door ahead of Wyatt, still wearing her coat and boots, desperate to meet her new sister. "Is she here? Can I see her? Is she beautiful? Does she have all her fingers and toes?" The questions tumbled out in a breathless rush. "Come here, sweetheart." Elena patted the bed beside her. "Come meet your sister." Juniper climbed up carefully, her eyes huge as she looked at the bundle in Elena's arms. Elena pulled back the blanket so Juniper could see Maggie's face, sleeping now, peaceful and impossibly small. "She's so tiny," Juniper breathed. "Mama, she's perfect." "She is." Elena shifted Maggie so Juniper could see better. "Her name is Margaret Rose, but we're going to call her Maggie. Do you want to hold her?" "Can I?" Juniper looked terrified and excited in equal measure. "What if I drop her?" "You won't drop her. I'll help you." Elena settled Juniper against the pillows and carefully placed Maggie in her arms, supporting the baby's head. "There. See? You're a natural." Juniper stared down at Maggie with such intense concentration that it made Elena's heart ache. Then, very gently, she touched one finger to the baby's tiny fist. Maggie's hand reflexively curled around Juniper's finger, holding on with surprising strength. "She's holding my hand," Juniper whispered, awed. "Mama, she knows I'm her sister." "Of course she does." Wyatt sat on the other side of the bed, completing their circle. "You're her big sister. You're going to teach her everything important. I'm going to teach her about flowers and how to draw horses and how to make bread and everything." Juniper looked up at Elena with shining eyes. "I'm going to tell her the story about how you and Papa saved me and how we became a family and how love is what matters, not blood. So she always knows that even though she's your baby from your belly, I'm just as much your daughter, right?" "Right." Elena's voice broke. "You're both my daughters, both my girls. I couldn't love you more if I tried, Juniper. You know that, don't you?" "I know." Juniper very carefully gave Maggie back to Elena, then threw her arms around both of them. "I have a sister now, a real sister. We're a real family." "We've always been a real family," Wyatt said, pulling them all close. "But yes, now we're a bigger real family. 4 Hales, all together, all choosing each other every single day." They stayed like that for a long time, tangled together in the warm bed, while snow fell outside and the fire crackled in the stove and Maggie slept the profound sleep of the newborn. A family, imperfect and beautiful and real. The years that followed were full of the ordinary magic of family life. Maggie grew from newborn to infant to toddler, chubby and happy and adored by her big sister. Juniper started school in town, learning to read and write with fierce determination, bringing home assignments that she completed at the kitchen table while Maggie babbled from her high chair. Wyatt expanded the ranch slowly, carefully, building their security one season at a time. Elena found herself part of a community of ranch wives, trading recipes and advice, hosting occasional gatherings where children played while mothers talked and laughed. They had struggles, of course. Maggie was colicky and kept them awake for months. A hard winter killed 2 of their cows. Juniper went through a phase of nightmares when she was 7, old fears surfacing unexpectedly, requiring patient reassurance that yes, this was forever. No one was taking her anywhere. Elena miscarried their 3rd child and grieved hard, wrapped in Wyatt's arms, while Juniper tried to comfort her, and Maggie, too young to understand, patted her face with sticky hands. But the good far outweighed the hard. Juniper's first school performance, where she played a tree in the Christmas pageant and took her role with utmost seriousness. Maggie's first steps, launching herself across the kitchen toward Elena with reckless confidence. The night Wyatt came in from town with news that he'd been offered a partnership in a larger cattle operation, more security, better prospects for their futures. Elena's 40th birthday, celebrated with both girls making her a cake that was lopsided and burnt on one side, but made with such love that she cried while eating it. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Wyatt gave Elena a gift, a small wooden box, hand-carved, beautiful. "Open it," he said, watching her face. Inside were 2 things. First, a photograph, the only one they'd ever had taken. The 4 of them posed stiffly in front of the photographer's backdrop in town. Wyatt and Elena seated, Juniper standing between them with one hand on each of their shoulders, toddler Maggie on Elena's lap, reaching for the camera. Formal and awkward, but precious beyond measure. Second, folded carefully, was the contract they'd written that first day. The terms of her employment as housekeeper, both of their signatures at the bottom, the paper yellowed with age. "I found this in my desk drawer," Wyatt said. "Been thinking about it, about how we started, what we agreed to, how far we've come from those desperate people trying to figure out how to survive each other." Elena ran her fingers over her own handwriting, remembering that frightened woman who'd needed every protection spelled out in writing, who'd been so terrified of being trapped that she'd demanded the right to leave at any time. "We were so scared," she said softly. "Both of us. Trying to be practical about something that was never going to be just practical." "I want to burn it," Wyatt said. "Not because what it represents was wrong, but because we don't need it anymore. We're not employer and employee. We're not even husband and wife as a legal convenience. We're just us, in love, choosing each other, building a life." "Yes." Elena handed him the paper. "Burn it. Let's start with a clean slate, no contracts, no agreements, just love." They burned it together in the fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken, watching their old fears go up in smoke. Then Wyatt pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I never gave you a proper ring," he said. "Not one you chose, one that was really yours. So I wanted—" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with 3 small stones, 2 diamonds flanking a sapphire. "The diamonds are for our girls. The sapphire is for you, for your strength and your courage. I had it made special. Will you— we're already married, but will you accept this? As a symbol of everything we've become?" Elena couldn't speak through her tears. She held out her hand and Wyatt slipped the new ring on beside the old one borrowed from a councilman on their desperate wedding day. "I love you," she managed finally. "I love you so much, it terrifies me sometimes. The thought of ever losing this, losing you. You won't lose me." Wyatt pulled her close. "I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together, Elena, for the rest of our lives, through everything that comes. I promise you that." "I promise you the same," Elena said against his chest. "Forever, Wyatt. I'm yours forever." 10 years after that frozen night on the train platform, Elena stood on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Juniper was 15 now, tall and beautiful and confident in ways Elena had never been at that age. She was in the barn teaching 10-year-old Maggie how to braid a horse's mane, both girls' laughter floating across the yard. Wyatt was due back from town any minute with supplies and probably peppermint sticks for the girls, still unable to resist spoiling them even as they grew. Elena rested one hand on her slightly rounded belly, another baby, unexpected but wanted, due next spring. At 42, she'd thought she was done with pregnancies, but apparently her body had other plans. Wyatt had been thrilled. The girls were already arguing about names. She heard the wagon before she saw it, Wyatt's familiar whistle cutting through the evening air. The girls ran out to greet him, and Elena watched as he climbed down and swept them both into hugs, pulling peppermint sticks from his pocket as predicted. Then he looked across the yard and saw Elena waiting, and his whole face lit up the way it still did after all these years. He crossed to her, pulled her close, kissed her with the casual ease of long marriage and deep love. "How are you feeling?" he asked, one hand coming to rest on her belly. "Happy," Elena said simply, incredibly, impossibly happy. And it was true. Standing there with her husband's arms around her, watching their daughters play in the yard of the home they'd built together, carrying another child who would grow up knowing nothing but love and safety. Elena Brooks Hale was happy. She'd been abandoned on a frozen train platform and left to die. She'd been called damaged goods, defective, worthless. She'd been so desperate for safety that she'd agreed to marry a stranger. She'd fought legal battles that seemed impossible to win. She'd been hours away from running away to Canada like a fugitive. And now she was here. Home. Surrounded by family. Building a life that would have seemed impossibly beautiful to that frozen girl on the platform. "What are you thinking?" Wyatt asked, reading her expression. "I'm thinking about how far we've come," Elena said. "How many times we could have given up or given in or just accepted that life was going to be hard and unfair. But we didn't. We kept fighting. We kept choosing each other. And we got this." She gestured at the ranch, the girls, the life they'd built. "We got everything." "We did." Wyatt kissed her forehead. "And we're going to keep getting it, every single day, for the rest of our lives. Promise?" "Promise." Later that night, after dinner was eaten and dishes washed, after the girls were in bed and the cabin was quiet, Elena and Wyatt sat on the porch one more time. The stars were impossibly bright, the air sharp with coming autumn. From somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently?" Elena asked. "If Fletcher had won custody? If Judge Thornton had ruled against us? If you'd never been in town that night I was left on the platform?" "Sometimes," Wyatt admitted, "but only in passing. Because the reality is what matters. We did find each other. Thornton did rule for us. Fletcher did back down. And now we're here, and this is real, and I don't need to wonder about anything else." "I used to wonder if I deserved this," Elena said quietly. "This much happiness, this much safety. After everything that happened before, the injury, the poverty, being rejected, I wondered if I'd somehow earned that through some cosmic accounting. And if I had, then maybe I didn't deserve the good that came after. And now? Now I know that's not how life works. Bad things happen to people who don't deserve them. Good things happen to people who don't deserve them. The universe doesn't keep accounts." Elena took Wyatt's hand. "What matters is what we do with what we're given. I was given a second chance when you offered me shelter. Given another when Juniper claimed me as her mother. Given a third when you proposed marriage to protect me. And I grabbed every single one with both hands and held on tight. That's what I deserved, not the happiness itself, but the chance to fight for it." "And you did fight," Wyatt said. "Like hell. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Elena. You've made this life as much as any of us. More than any of us. We've made it together." Elena leaned against his shoulder, fitting into that familiar space. "That's what I'm most proud of. Not surviving, not even thriving, but building this together. A family that chose each other. A love that was earned and fought for and worth every moment of fear it took to get here." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel overhead, listening to the soft sounds of home, horses moving in the barn, wind through the trees, the creak of the cabin settling. Inside, their daughters slept safely. Inside, their life waited to be lived another day. Elena Brooks Hale was no longer the frozen girl on a train platform, terrified and alone. She was a wife, a mother, a woman who'd fought for everything she had and won. She was loved deeply and safely, and she loved just as deeply in return, and this time, forever, no one could take it away.